Good evening. It's 5 p.m. and I call to order the December 17th, 2024 Board of Trustees meeting. Do I hear a motion to enter executive session?
Madam Chair, I move we enter executive session to discuss employment recommendations and updates and to receive a quarterly legal update.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We will now enter into executive session.
I was in a bit of a panic because I legitimately thought there was a physical altercation because that's the alarm that goes off on our cell phone. So I just took off running to help Mr. Black, and when Mr. Black was, kind of saying stop, stop, then I realized with all of the cheers what actually was happening. I think I was in more shock than anything. I had certainly justified in my head that 2 weeks later I probably did not get this award, so I was in complete shock.
Ashley is, when you first meet her, like I said, she's just a very quiet person, and so I think sometimes people can underestimate quiet people, but what she's doing is she's listening and she's processing all of the information, and then she's always going to come to the table with some really strong ideas. She's not someone who feels like she has all the answers, so she's always willing to take other people's ideas and viewpoints into consideration, including students, which I think is one of the things that makes her such an outstanding assistant principal.
What it means more than anything is just, I think it's a reflection of the really good things that are happening at Pleasant Hill Middle, and to be able to be a part of that leadership team and to kind of celebrate the growth that our school is having with our faculty, staff, and students, and just also being able to acknowledge some of the things that I've brought to the table as well.
Miss Foudy is always ready to help a student whenever they want to or whenever they need, really, and she's just always like the heart of the principals, if that makes sense. She's just very good at what she does, and she's always ready to help whenever she needs to.
I think what everybody should know about Ashley Foudy is that she feels very deeply and she thinks very logically. Those two characteristics merge really well together to make pretty much the perfect assistant principal.
I'm certainly proud. I'm certainly incredibly happy. I really appreciate, the district nominating me. I feel seen more than anything. So I'm happy to represent our school and our district, and then I guess ultimately our state.
just walked into the stage, and then we just waved to everybody to say hi, and then we just wore our unified team. It was very exciting, 100% excited for sure.
This is just a huge deal to me because I have always seen them as equals and as friends and as buddies and all that stuff. But today we got recognized nationally, which means that not only myself realizes that, but the whole school and the whole nation agrees with that, and that's huge.
Lexington One has been amazing in their unified and inclusive programming. River Bluff, before it was even actually built, had already signed off to be a unified champion school, which is completely different than every other school in the entire state. They had already planned to start some unified sports, inclusive youth leadership and whole school engagement within their school. And there's a lot of schools within Lexington One that have also bought in and have created this culture within the entire district that inclusion and unified is a pillar of their district, and it's something that they want to promote from elementary the whole way up through high schools.
I want all of our students to take away the thought of inclusion, the leadership and the courage to include everybody in everything that they do, acceptance, personal and social responsibility. All of those things are very important to the culture here at River Bluff, and important out in the world. When our students go out in the world, everybody is different. And seeing those differences here and including those differences here, students can take that for a lifetime.
We are teaching bigger lessons in life, teaching lessons about character, teaching lessons about folks being included in all walks of life. Our classes now for those students, our project, our PE Unified, Dance Unified, all those classes have doubled, where it's now competitive, where students covet that experience and they want to be a part of that experience. And these are some of our outstanding leaders, like Molly, who are outstanding young leaders who are giving their time to love and serve others. That's the core of River Bluff. That's our heartbeat, and that really speaks volumes to our culture.
All the students at River Bluff should realize that it doesn't only have to be at school where you include. It can be in the grocery store, in a restaurant, anywhere you are. I think that they should take away the being recognized nationally and take it away in their lives forever and ever.
One teacher in particular has stood out when I think of my journey at Red Bank, and that teacher is Miss Herring. One reason why Miss Herring has impacted my life is because she's always welcoming.
2 years ago when I first met you, you greeted me with a warm smile, and you looked excited to teach the class.
Hi, Miss Neto. You were my favorite teacher because you did not ever raise your voice at us, and you were funny and nice to everyone.
Don't read this.
Okay, I won't read it.
You're a great teacher and incredibly talented at teaching.
So, Miss Winley, I was thinking about you, and I just wanted to say, thank you for all that you have done for me the past 3 years. You've been such an inspiration teaching me dance.
I met Miss Winley my third grade year. It was her first time teaching at Pillion Elementary. I remember the first week of school going into her room and thinking she's nice and pretty. I knew it's going to be a good year. She helped me understand my 9 timetable by teaching me the 9 trick. She helped me become more confident in myself with friends and schoolwork.
When I doubted myself, she helped me persevere through it. When I had trouble spelling a word, she gave me the strategies and tools I needed to figure out the correct spelling on my own. Even though this year I'm graduating 5th grade and moving schools, I'll always remember how Ms. Herring impacted my life, not only in learning, but in the person I am today.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh.
I feel excited to come into your class because you create an environment that makes the students feel safe, understood. You have enough time for the class, and even though you are a wife, a mother of 2, and a teacher, you still have enough time to create activities and make everybody engage, and not only the students, but also you. Thank you so much for everything you've done, Ms. Garcia.
I was happy to go to your class every day, and you also had the best student teacher ever. Plus, you did Mathers with us.
Thank you so much. This means so much to me.
Get the points across and make every student understand it well. I can tell it's very clear you have a passion for history, and it really shows. It really does. From how detailed you are, able to talk about it down to you being able to get a full understanding of history so you can teach it so flawlessly, okay?
Anytime I get to see you, either I'm in musical theater, dance, or dance team practice, makes me feel the happiest. I feel like I can always talk to you no matter what. Thank you for being an amazing teacher and coach.
Aw, thank you, Maddie.
She is my favorite teacher. The kids who get her next will love her. Miss Warney, thank you for being my teacher.
Tears.
Oh, I love you so much. I'm so proud of you.
Gilbert High student Killian Boyce, interning with the GHS drama teacher, helps students at the school put on a memorable performance of the children's book, The Dead Family Diaz.
At the beginning of the school year, when we realized what an amazing group of students that we had, we knew we wanted to do a production. And so I found a book called The Dead Family Diaz, which was a picture book that was all about Dia de los Muertos and kind of the culture around it. When Killian came to me at the beginning of the semester and said that they wanted to do an internship with me, I knew that Killian was really interested in writing. I knew Killian loved to write, whether it was plays, whether it was poems, whether it was short stories. So we decided to build this internship around her interests and what would help our show.
I was actually given the book my first day at the internship, and it already was somewhat started. I went onto the document that Ms. Simmons had already made and began, and then just somewhat went in editing and adding on to it, asking questions like, hey, would this work, would that work, and trying to be, of course, respectful as I can with the book and with a tradition that I'm not entirely familiar with. Just so fantastic to feel that. It felt very prideful. It was like, here's all this work that I've done, that Ms. Simmons has done, that these kids have done, and something's clicking and everything's going to go well. And that's the moment that I knew we had a show, we had, you know, something to work on and make better and better and better. And then today we actually put that on. And of course, no show is perfect, but this was, my expectations were absolutely blown away.
When you see a student who is able to do something like that and create some work that they're excited about, that they feel proud of, and then be able to see it staged and mounted like that, that's why we do what we do.
I definitely think that I will do this again, and if I don't, I will hold these memories and experiences very close to my heart.
It gives them an understanding of what we've done and what we've accomplished, and it helps them gain more knowledge about our culture.
We're very proud of presenting for the 4th year in a row our Living Museum, which is an amazing opportunity for our students to be able to represent Hispanic important figures who have contributed to the world in a very positive way.
Not only shows the culture, the heritage, everything with Hispanic Heritage Month and the studies, but it also opened our eyes to who these people were outside of their careers.
It just means a lot to me because that these kids that are here today can learn more about Jenny, about other people that are mentioned, like Selena Quintanilla, Frida Kahlo. They can learn about more how they are, what they did, maybe how they influenced the world.
In the immersion program, it's very important for students to learn about culture, to be able to be immersed in the Hispanic culture, helps them having a wider perspective of their world and help them to contribute to the society and to embrace different cultures.
I think it just kind of shows a more diverse understanding, and it really helps appreciate the culture, because of course there's a lot of cultures around the world that we can experience and learn about, but I feel like this is such a broad one that so many people don't know much about, and I think it's a good thing to share.
I think it's very important for our community at Gilbert High School to be able to participate in these kind of events and understand that the diversity and embrace the diversity we have among our community.
I think especially after this, I could dig in not only more in Hispanic, but other cultures to get a more broad understanding of everything, and I think it'll be nice. mean, I was in a bit of a panic because I legitimately thought there was a physical altercation, because that's the alarm that goes off on our cell phone. So I just took off running to help Mr. Black, and when Mr. Black was, kind of saying stop, stop, then I realized with all of the cheers what actually was happening. I mean, I think I was in more shock than anything. I had certainly justified in my head that 2 weeks later I probably did not, get this award. So I was in complete shock.
Ashley is, when you first meet her, like I said, she's just a very quiet person. And so I think sometimes people can underestimate quiet people, but what she's doing is she's listening and she's processing all of the information, and then she's always going to come to the table with some really strong ideas. She's not someone who feels like she has all the answers, so she's always willing to take other people's ideas and viewpoints into consideration, including students, which I think is one of the things that makes her such an outstanding assistant principal.
What it means more than anything is just, I think it's a reflection of the really good things that are happening at Pleasant Hill Middle, and to be able to be a part of that leadership team and to kind of celebrate the growth that our school is having with our faculty, staff, and students, and just also being able to acknowledge some of the things that I've brought to the table as well.
Miss Foudy is always ready to help a student whenever they want to or whenever they need, really, and she's just always like the heart of like the principals, if that makes sense. She's just very good at what she does, and she's always ready to help whenever she needs to.
I think what everybody should know about Ashley Foudy is that she feels very deeply and she thinks very logically. Those two characteristics merge really well together to make pretty much the perfect assistant principal.
I mean, I'm certainly proud. I'm certainly incredibly happy. I really appreciate, the district nominating me. I feel seen more than anything. So I'm happy to represent our school and our district, and then I guess ultimately our state.
We just walked into the stage, and then we just waved to everybody to say hi, and then we swore our unified greeting. I was very excited, 100% excited for sure.
This is just a huge deal to me because I have always seen them as equals and as friends and as buddies and all that stuff. But today we got recognized nationally, which means that not only myself realizes that, but the whole school and the whole nation agrees with that, and that's huge.
Lexington One has been amazing in their unified and inclusive programming. River Bluff, before it was even actually built, had already signed off to be a unified champion school, which is completely different than every other school in the entire state. They had already planned to start some unified sports, inclusive youth leadership, and whole school engagement within their school. And there's a lot of schools within Lexington One that have also bought in and have created this culture within the entire district that inclusion and unified is a pillar of their district, and it's something that they want to promote from elementary the whole way up through high schools.
I want all of our students to take away the thought of inclusion, the leadership and the courage to include everybody in everything that they do, acceptance, personal and social responsibility. All of those things are very important to the culture here at River Bluff, and important out in the world. When our students go out in the world, everybody is different, and seeing those differences here and including those differences here, students can take that for a lifetime.
We are teaching bigger lessons in life, teaching lessons about character, teaching lessons about folks being included in all walks of life. Our classes now for those students, our project, our PE Unified, Dance Unified, all those classes have doubled, where it's now competitive, where students covet that experience and they want to be a part of that experience. And these are some of our outstanding leaders, like Molly, who are outstanding young leaders who are giving their time to love and serve others. That's the core of River Bluff. That's our heartbeat, and that really speaks volumes to our culture.
All the students at River Bluff should realize that it doesn't only have to be at school where you include, it can be in the grocery store, in a restaurant, anywhere you are. I think that they should take away the being recognized nationally and take it away in their lives forever and ever.
One teacher in particular has stood out when I think of my journey at Red Bank, and that teacher is Miss Herring. One reason why Miss Herring has impacted my life is because she's always welcoming.
2 years ago when I first met you, you greeted me with a warm smile and you looked excited to teach the class.
Hi, Miss Neto. You were my favorite teacher because you did not ever raise your voice at us, and you were funny and nice to everyone.
Don't write this.
Okay, I won't read it.
You're a great teacher and incredibly talented at teaching.
So, Miss Winley, I was thinking about you, and I just wanted to say, thank you for all that you have done for me the past 3 years. You've been such an inspiration teaching me dance.
I met Miss Winnie my third grade year. It was her first time teaching at Pillion Elementary. I remember the first week of school going into her room and thinking she's nice and pretty. I knew it was going to be a good year. She helped me understand my 9th timetable by teaching me the 9th street. She helped me become more confident in myself with friends and schoolwork.
When I doubted myself, she helped me persevere through it. When I had trouble spelling a word, she gave me the strategies and tools I needed to figure out the correct spelling on my own. Even though this year I'm graduating 5th grade and moving schools, I'll always remember how Ms. Herring impacted my life, not only in learning, but in the person I am today.
I feel excited to come into your class because you create an environment that makes the students feel safe, understood. You have enough time for the class, and even though you are a wife, a mother of 2, and a teacher, you still have enough time to create activities and make everybody engage, and not only the students, but also you. Thank you so much for everything you've done, Ms. Garcia.
I was happy to go to your class every day, and you also had the best student teacher ever. Plus, you did math labs with us.
Thank you so much. This means so much to me. Get the points across and make every student understand it well. I can tell it's very clear you have a passion for history, and it really shows. It really does. From how detailed you are, able to talk about it down to you being able to get a full understanding of history so you can teach it so flawlessly, okay?
Anytime I get to see you, either I'm in musical theater, dance, or dance team practice, makes me feel the happiest. I feel like I can always talk to you no matter what. Thank you for being an amazing teacher and coach.
Thank you, Maddie.
She is my favorite teacher. The kids who get her next will love her. Miss Warney, thank you for being my teacher.
Tears.
Oh, I love you so much. I'm so proud of you.
Gilbert High student Killian Boyce, interning with the GHS drama teacher, helps students at the school put on a memorable performance of the children's book, The Dead Family Diaz.
At the beginning of the school year, when we realized what an amazing group of students that we had, we knew we wanted to do a production. And so I found a book called The Dead Family Diaz, which was a picture book that was all about Dia de los Muertos and kind of the culture around it. When Killian came to me at the beginning of the semester and said that they wanted to do an internship with me, I knew that Killian was really interested in writing. I knew Killian loved to write, whether it was plays, whether it was poems, whether it was short stories. So we decided to build this internship around her interests and what would help our show.
I was actually given the book my first day at the internship, and it already was somewhat started. I went onto the document that Ms. Simmons had already made and began, and then just somewhat went in editing and adding on to it, asking questions like, hey, would this work, would that work, and trying to be, of course, respectful as I can with the book and with a tradition that I'm not entirely familiar with. Just so fantastic to feel that. It felt very prideful. It was like, here's all this work that I've done, that Ms. Simmons has done, that these kids have done, and something's clicking and everything's going to go well. And that's the moment that I knew we had a show, we had, something to work on and make better and better and better. And then today we actually put that on. And of course, no show is perfect, but this was, my expectations were absolutely blown away.
When you see a student who is able to do something like that and create some work that they're excited about, that they feel proud of, and then be able to see it staged and mounted like that, that's why we do what we do.
I definitely think that I will do this again, and if I don't, I will hold these memories and experiences very close to my heart.
Okay, do I hear a motion to conclude executive session?
Madam Chair, I move we conclude executive session.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. I call to order the December 17th, 2024 board meeting. The district is in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act by notifying the media of the date, time, and place of the meeting. The district tapes the meeting for accuracy in preparing the minutes. I now yield the floor to Mrs. Beth Shealy.
Madam Chair, fellow board members, staff, and guests, please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Madam Chair, I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Okay. According to Board Policy BD, Organization of the Board, board officers are elected and sworn in at the first regularly scheduled meeting following the seating of new board members. Each officer will serve a 2-year term. At this time, I will turn the meeting over to Dr. Postlewaite to preside over the election of officers. Once the chair is elected, the remainder of the elections will be conducted by the board chair.
Good evening. At this time, I'd like to open the floor for nominations for board chair of Lexington County School District 1.
Dr. Postlewaite, good evening, guests. I would like to nominate Kathy Henson for board chair.
Mrs. Henson has been nominated. Do I hear any other nominations? Hearing none, the nominations are closed. According to Policy BD, we give any nominated candidates a brief opportunity to make a statement. Mrs. Henson, would you like to do that?
Sure. Serving on the board the last 4 years has been a great joy and a lot of work. And over these last few years, I've learned a lot. And as we all know, we are equal partners in this, but I do feel like I possess some of the traits that are needed to facilitate our meetings, and my experience the last 2 years as vice chair has also helped me understand that role through parliamentary procedure, Robert's Rules of Order, and I appreciate the nomination, Ms. McCown.
Thank you. Board members, you have before you a ballot. Will you please cast your vote by recording it on the ballot and passing it to me when you're finished? Thank you. Have a drum roll, please. Surprisingly, the board chair is Mrs. Kathy Henson. Congratulations, Mrs. Henson. Since it is unanimous, I will not be turning the ballots over to another board officer to double count, but I will give them to her for safekeeping to make sure that we have followed the procedure. Mrs. Henson, I now turn the meeting back over to you for completion of election of officers.
Thank you, Dr. Postlewaite. At this time, nominations for the office of Vice Chair of the Lexington County School District 1 Board of Trustees are open. Do I hear a nomination for Vice Chair of the Lexington 1 Board of Trustees?
Madam Chair, board members, and guests, I nominate Beth Shealy for Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Are there any further nominations for the office of Board Chair? It does. My script says Board Chair. You're right. Any nominations for the office of Board Vice Chair?
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
public and fellow board members, I would like to nominate Mrs. Katie McCown to the office of Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pizzuti. Are there any further nominations for the office of Board Vice Chair? Hearing none, the nominations are closed. At this time, I'd like to give each candidate the opportunity for a brief statement, so we'll just go in alphabetical order. Ms. McCown, here first.
Thank you. I did write a little note. Thank you for considering me for the role of vice chair. The primary responsibility of the vice chair, as outlined in Robert's rules, is to ensure continuity of leadership by stepping in for the chair when she's out and assisting with responsibilities, staying informed about the board's business. And one way I plan to do this is by reaching out to each board member prior to the agenda setting and gather their input on issues they've heard from constituents and the community that should be discussed. Advocating alongside my fellow board members and ensuring every voice is heard is a very important topic for me. Additionally, I bring a collaborative approach to leadership, and I'm committed to fostering a positive and productive working relationship. Thank you for your nomination.
Mrs. Shealy.
Thank you for the nomination. Ms. McCowan did a great job outlining the duties and responsibilities of the vice chair. One of those, which is to support the chair and to step in as the chair as needed, hopefully not needed as often as it could be. But a couple of things just to mention. First of all, the School Board Association does a training for the chair, vice chair, secretary roles. And I did attend that training last year, so I do feel like I have that training already under my belt for this responsibility. In my professional life, I also lead a large number of meetings, committees, etc., which have uniquely qualified me for a role such as this. I have served as the board secretary for the past 2 years, so I have learned and gained experience and knowledge functioning as an officer, and you've had the opportunity to see how I would function as an officer as well. At the end of the day, I think all of our responsibilities are to understand our unique talents and abilities and then offer up those talents and abilities to the best interest of our students, our district, and our board. With that in mind, I feel like this is a unique skill and talent that I have, and so I offer it up to the position of vice chair. However, at the end of the day, I am pleased to serve in whatever capacity the board deems most appropriate.
Thank you both for your willingness to serve and for sharing a little bit about why you'd like to serve. All right, at this time, you have before you a ballot for vice chair. Please record your vote and fold it in half and pass it to me. The newly elected vice chair is Beth Shealy by a vote of 4-3. Congratulations, Ms. Shealy. Now we will, go ahead. Now we will move on to the office of secretary. At this time, nominations for the office of secretary of the Lexington County School District 1 Board of Trustees are open. Do I hear a nomination for secretary of the Lexington 1 Board of Trustees?
Madam Chair, distinguished guest and board, I'd like to nominate Katie McCowan as secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Are there any further nominations for the office of secretary?
Madam Chair, I would like to nominate Nick Pizzuti for secretary.
Are there any further nominations for the office of secretary?
Madam Chair, I would like to nominate Chris Rice for the office of secretary.
Okay. Are there any further nominations for the office of secretary?
I'm just glad we all want to serve.
Me too.
Amen.
It does show you the heart and the desire of this board to not only serve in our capacities, but also be leaders. So, hearing no other nominations, the nominations are now closed. At this time, I'd like to let each candidate give a brief statement. So, let's see, we have Pasuti McCown. Oh, I did say ABC order. Ms. McCown, you already spoke about your desire to serve. Do you have anything you'd like to add to your desire? No, nothing else to add at this time. Okay. Next would be PQR. Pizzuti.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. McCown, for the nomination. So I'm the new one. I think a precedent was set last time that you don't have to be a board member for many years to be an officer. I was elected to serve, and serving is what I'd like to do. I think with my experience of being someone that knows how to dot the I's and cross the T's, being in a type of management role that handles that would be good for making sure all the documents we have stay in good order. And I think just a new face on this board and a new face on the officer would be good for this district. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Rice.
Well, I'm not the new face on the board, but I have been on the board for 2 years. Campaigned pretty hard over the last 6 years to get here, and really wanted to serve in any capacity I can. Just like being one of 7 here on the board, I always believe that you can lead from wherever you are. So secretary would be a position, to be an honor to be an officer, but at the same time, I will follow whatever the will of the board is. Very detailed oriented. Also, I've had a lot of experience on different boards, and so I realize even though you may hold an office, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're greater than anybody else. So we're all a sum of a whole on the board, and so I just appreciate the nomination. Thank you, Ms. Shealy.
Okay, board members, you have a ballot before you for secretary. Please record your vote, fold it in half, and pass it to me. With a vote of 3 to 2 to 2, the newly elected secretary is Mr. Chris Rice. Congratulations, Mr. Rice. According to Administrative Rule BJR, Board Legislative Program, at its annual organizational meeting, the board will appoint a member as its board legislative contact to the South Carolina School Boards Association. At least once each month, the board meeting agenda will include an opportunity for the board legislative contact to report on educational issues pending on the state and federal levels. So this is an appointment, not a vote, but at this time we can discuss this appointment.
Madam Chair, going back to the voting we just did, according to policy, it says if a majority of votes is not received, what considers a majority? Because majority of this board would be 4.
That's a great question. I believe for this, it's the majority of the votes received.
So it says when more than 2 nominees are on the ballot and no candidate receives a majority of votes, a runoff will be held between the nominees receiving the 2 highest vote counts.
Right, so no being a majority. So if it had been 3-3-1, I think we would have had a runoff between 3-3 and 1.
Okay, just clarification. Thank you.
Nick, where were you looking at that? Sorry, I wasn't backwards.
Policy BD, organization of the board. And I'm not arguing the election. I'm just making sure we follow the correct way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There. And if no candidate receives the majority of votes, a runoff will be held. So a candidate did receive the majority. Thank you for checking on that, though. Oh, I can't turn my mic off. So, I had a conversation with Mr. Rice, seeing if he had any interest in this role. Mr. Rice, you're now an officer, so I'm not sure if that changes your thoughts on possibly wanting to serve in this capacity. Is there anyone else that might be interested in serving in this capacity? And again, you would be receiving updates from SCSBA about educational issues, depending on the state and federal level, and you would just kind of, I guess, be added to a list to be contacted by them, and you would just keep us updated.
Ms. Henson.
Yes, sir.
I mean, I will speak. I'm obviously interested in it, but I'm willing to serve wherever I need to serve. So if we have other folks from the board that it's their pleasure to really, really serve in that position, I'm willing to step aside, but I'm also willing to take that mantle and serve in that capacity if that's the board's wish.
Okay. Well, yes, ma'am.
May I say something?
Absolutely.
I'm going to tally the newbie. Nick and I have a running.
Hey, I've pulled that card for 2 years.
I am great with Chris serving. I just think that it may make sense to spread out duties across the entire board opposed to overloading one person. Since it's not a vote and it's an appointment, I don't want Chris to feel obligated to say yes, not that he's not capable of speaking for himself. But I do think it may be worth thinking about making sure we have somebody that's not also in an officer position.
Mrs. Flashnick, are you interested?
No, I'm sorry, I cannot. I wish I could say yes.
I read a book one time called The Best Yes, and sometimes your best yes is
I
no.
will step forward, and I will be happy to do that if it is the will and pleasure of the board. I have been affiliated with the South Carolina School Board Association for 8 years now. I know most of the people over there, and wherever I can help.
Okay. Mr. Rice, I know we had this discussion, but Ms. Flashnick does bring an excellent suggestion. So, Mr. Anderson, for the next 12 months, would you please serve in the role of board legislative contact to the SCSBA?
I'll be honored.
Thank you. All right. Moving on to item 6.0, the consent agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Madam Chair, I move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Moving on to item 7.0, do I hear a motion to approve 4 certified staff recommendations for the 2024-2025 school year?
Madam Chair, I move we approve 4 certified staff for the 2024-2025 school year.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Y'all were simultaneous. Thank you, Mr. Rice. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Do I hear a motion to approve 1 administrative recommendation for 2024-2025?
Madam Chair, I move we approve 1 administrative recommendation for 2024-2025 school year.
Thank you, Ms. Shealy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. We do not have any other action stemming from executive session other than the fact that we did receive a quarterly legal update, and no action is required at this time. All right, a fun time of the night. I don't know if I have one in front of me, but Proof Positive was a newsletter you could have grabbed on your way in. Oh, this one right here. You could have grabbed it on your way in. It was on the sign-in table. Once we finish honoring all of our honorees, we will give you a chance to leave before we resume the rest of our meeting. So Dr. Postlewaite and Dr. Price, will you please step out front? We have several honorees here tonight, so when you hear your name called, please come and stand with Dr. Postlewaite and Dr. Price as we tell the audience all about you and your achievements. Oh, look at that. Okay, for our student awards tonight, we are excited to honor athletes from River Bluff High School and Lakeside Middle for placing first in the state swimming championships. Please come forward as I call your name. From River Bluff High, Macy Wells placed first in the 100-yard butterfly and the 100-yard backstroke. This win makes Macy a 3rd-time state champion in the 100-yard butterfly and a 2-time state champion in the 100-yard backstroke. That's awesome. Stay up here. I'm going to call the next River Bluff student to take a picture with y'all. All right, and stay right here so your teammate can come up. Would River Bluff High students Anna Heath Ray and Callie Wells and Lakeside Middle student Ellie Wells, are y'all sisters?
Carly Wells.
Oh, thank you, Carly Wells. Please join us. This group won the state title in the 200-yard medley relay. The Gators are coached by Meredith Moles and Annie Marr. Congratulations, students and coaches. That's Gator green, right? Now we are moving on to staff awards, starting with staff member at the College Center. Would Megan Pasik Rankin please come forward? Megan's TCC's dual enrollment graduation coach recently earned her Global Career Development Facilitator credential. For Megan to receive this credential, she has to abide by the GCDF Code of Ethics, complete supervised career development, and complete a 120-hour minimum comprehensive training of the 12 GCDF core competencies. The Global Career Development Facilitator credential was developed by the Center for Credentialing and Education in collaboration with the National Career Development Association and the National Occupational Information Coordinating Committee in the mid-1990s. The GCDF U.S. credentialing program is the first and most notable national credential in the field of career development. Since its inception, the GCDF has had a significant impact on the field of career development, and only 14,000 individuals in the U.S. have been credentialed as a GCDF in the U.S. Congratulations, Megan, and thank you for helping our students become college, career, and military ready. Now would Kelly DeBose and Julie Painter, members of our finance department, please join Dr. Postlewaite and Dr. Price up front. Kelly and Julie recently earned their Certified School Business Officer certification from the South Carolina Association of School Business Officials, a prestigious and rigorous designation in school finance. To earn this certification, candidates must meet several criteria, including being an active SCA/SBO member, having at least 5 years of experience in school finance, and completing 40 hours of intensive coursework. The 4 required sessions cover a broad range of essential topics such as School Finance Accounting 101, Financial Reporting and Auditing, Budgeting, Internal Controls and Financial Management, Capital and Debt Planning, Strategic Planning. My goodness. Both Kelly and Julie not only successfully completed all required courses, but also passed the exams for each session, demonstrating their commitment to professional development and excellence in school finance. This certification shows their hard work, expertise, and dedication to supporting the financial health and success of our district. Congratulations. Lastly, we would also like to recognize the principals and assistant principals who are here with us this evening. Would you please stand? This is definitely an incredibly busy time for all of you, so thank you so much for being here tonight. All right. Thank you, everyone, for taking time to recognize our amazing students, staff, and schools. We love sharing these achievements with you. If you need to leave, we will give you a quick and quiet moment to do that now. What? I mean, all 3 girls. How do I know if we have citizens participation? Tracy. Have any citizens participation? No? Okay. Item 9.0 is citizens participation, but we do not have any tonight, so we will move on to 10.0, which is the report of our annual comprehensive financial report. And Ms. Miller, our Chief Financial Officer, will introduce our auditors.
Yes, good evening, Chairwoman Kathy Henson, Superintendent Dr. Postlewaite, and Superintendent-elect Dr. Price, and board members. The Lexington County School District Annual Comprehensive Financial Report for fiscal year June 30th, 2024 has been finalized. Before we hear from the independent audit firm that will present at the board meeting this evening, I would like to take a moment to extend my sincere thanks to the Finance Department. From the initial stages of preliminary fieldwork in May, with the auditor's site visits throughout the summer and the fall, their meticulous attention to detail, collaborative teamwork, and unwavering dedication were evident throughout the entire process. Securing a clean audit with no findings is a remarkable achievement, and it reflects the professionalism and hard work each of you have put forth to ensure the success of this effort. I'm truly grateful for everything you do, not just during the audit process, but throughout the entire year. So thank you very much. And with that, I will introduce Mr. Tim Lyons. He is a partner in charge of the Columbia and Raleigh offices of Malden and Jenkins, working with state and local government agencies and educational institutions throughout the Southeast. And additionally, I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Brian Nicholson, the director with Malden and Jenkins, who is here with us this evening. And Mr. Nicholson was our primary contact throughout the entire audit, and we appreciate everything that they did to make the audit process as smooth as possible. So with that, Mr. Lyons.
Can we get your
Is your mic on?
How's that? Is that better? Want to take the opportunity to thank Jennifer and her team. Whereas we're going to kind of get in, and I know, as you all know, there's a lot that goes into conducting an audit, especially of a school district of this size. We ask for access to a lot of information and a lot of different people throughout the organization, and just really appreciate all of the hard work that goes into getting ready, getting the audit done, getting the audit completed and turned around in a relatively tight timeline. So quickly tonight, our agenda here for my presentation. And tonight will just be a little bit longer. This is our first year at Malden & Jenkins working with the district, so I want to maybe kind of go through a bit of a different and a bit more in-depth of a presentation that we would potentially give in future years. But just to touch on the engagement team and the timeline, the ACFR itself, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, the results of the audit, and then what are known as our required communications. We have a few slides on some financial trends, just some high-level trends that we typically look at with a lot of our state and local governments, but particularly with school districts here in South Carolina, comments, recommendations, and other issues. And of course, I have a slide at the end for questions, but certainly as I'm going along, if there's anything you all need to ask me about, feel free to stop me and ask me as I go. As Jennifer mentioned, my name is Tim Lyons. I served as the engagement partner on the district's audit. What that means is that I have the ultimate responsibility for signing off and signing the audit report. Brian, who's here with me as well in the audience, was the director on the audit. He kind of managed our audit team day to day as we went through and conducted the audit. And each audit at M&J goes through a second partner review. So when we get done, when Brian and I got finished, we turn everything over to a partner in our governmental practice, his name is Grant Davis. He is here in our Columbia office, who has nothing to do with the district's audit. And so he does a completely independent review of both the audit file and our final deliverables to make sure that we've done everything that we need to do in order to issue an audit opinion. There's a lot that goes into an audit, as both Jennifer and I have mentioned, and when we look at the audit process at Malden & Jenkins, we break it down, especially with our governmental practice and with state and local governments and with school districts, we break it down into 3 distinct phases. Segment 1 is our kind of planning and interim procedures. We do a lot of documentation, a lot of preparation, a lot of planning during this time to make sure that our engagement team is both aware of what we need to do as we get into the audit and to make the district personnel aware of what we're going to need to give them as much time as we can to pull everything that we're going to need to review once we get to fiscal year end through the fiscal close process and then get into segment 2, which is our year-end audit procedures. And so this is kind of the final audit fieldwork phase, This is where the bulk of the testing happens. So this is where we're actually going in. We're looking at supporting documentation. We are vouching various things. We're tying things out to confirmations that we receive from financial institutions, confirmations we receive from the state of South Carolina, from the Department of Education, going over all of the compliance testing we have to do for both the federal and the state side. And then segment 3, that quality control review and completion, that is our completion phase where we complete the audit, we sign off on everything, and the final ACFR, the final annual comprehensive financial report, was dated November the 25th of 2024. Just briefly to point out, I know I've heard some of y'all mention y'all are new on the board, but I think the district should be commended for the preparation of an ACFR. The preparation of an ACFR is not a requirement. You are required to prepare basic financial statements and a management's discussion and analysis. In order to prepare an ACFR, there's a lot more that goes into it. There's a preparation of a letter of transmittal. There's a preparation of a very detailed statistical section that shows a lot of trend information over the last, in most cases, 10 years in the back of the ACFR. The district is one of only a handful of school districts that we audit in the state that goes to that level of reporting and preparing an ACFR. So I think the district should be commended. Once the ACFR is completed, it gets submitted to 2 different organizations, the Association of School Business Officials, ASBO, as well as the GFOA of the U.S. and Canada, and submits it for participation in their award programs. A pretty rigorous program. There's a big grading rubric that goes into that. The district's ACFR for 2023 received both the awards from ASBO and GFOA. Those awards are included within the 2024 report, and we believe that the 2024 report meets all the requirements to continue to receive those awards. So do think the district should be commended for the preparation of a document that goes well above and beyond minimum reporting requirements. So getting into the results of the audit, not to bury the lead here, but the highlight here is that second bullet on the middle of this slide, our report. We issued an unmodified or a clean opinion on the district's financial statements. Unmodified is a fancy accounting auditing term for a clean opinion. There's no higher or better opinion that you can get. And so what that means is that the numbers that you see in the district's ACFR are considered to present fairly the financial position of the district and its results of operations and changes in net position for the fiscal year ended June the 30th of 2024. There are also 2 additional reports that we issue with the ACFR. There is a report on internal controls over financial reporting and on compliance in accordance with government auditing standards. The district's audit has to be conducted in accordance with GAS because of the significant federal awards the district gets and the single audits that we do, which we'll talk about in just a second. There were no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal control identified, and no instances of noncompliance were reported. The final report has to do with the uniform guidance. This is the federal rules that govern how the district, as with all other state, local governments, nonprofits, have to spend federal money. We go through a major program determination where we look at the composition of the district's federal awards. There is a schedule of expenditures of federal awards in the back of the district's ACFR that shows the total dollar amount of federal awards spent during the fiscal year. We have to go through a process to identify which of those qualify as major programs that we have to test. For this year, we had 2 major programs, the Child Nutrition Cluster, which is the school nutrition program, as well as the ESF, the Education Stabilization Fund, commonly known as ESSER, for the last couple of years. So we had those 2 major programs, an unmodified or clean opinion on compliance, and again, no findings were reported during the conduct of the single audit and with the issuance of our single audit report. The next few slides are what are known as our required communications. These are things that I'm required to give to you all in writing. I've done so I'm not going to go through and read each one of these. I'm going to touch on a few. I think there are a few of these that are important enough that those charged with governance should hear directly from the auditor on. Under the significant accounting policies, that second one, if you're somebody that likes to look at the financial statements and potentially look and see how did things change from one year to the next, there were no new accounting standards implemented in this year's, so you won't see anything new in the financial statements if you were to kind of compare 23 to 24. The last couple of years, we had some new things with leases and these subscription technology arrangements and those things. We had none of those for this year. There was a new accounting standard that was out there for this year, but it did not have an impact on the school district's financial statements. Our relationship with management, as I touched on, full cooperation from the district's management. Again, appreciate the willingness to help and get us everything that we need to conduct our audit. We did have one past audit adjustment. So what that means is during our testing, we identified an amount related to the reporting of the district's compensated absences. We talked about it with district management. We agreed it was not material to the district's financial statements, and we did not end up posting that. So what that relates to is the district's compensated absences. It's an accrual that is in the statement of net position. It's the district's liability for accrued leave that are owed to employees of the district. We've been including future contributions to the state retirement system in that number, essentially overstating the liability, and those need to come out. Next year, there's a new accounting standard, GASB Statement Number 101, that completely changes how we define compensated absences and how governments report those. And so with the implementation of that new standard, those future retirement contributions have to come out anyway. So knowing that we're going to get this has to get fixed or changed, I should say, has to get changed in the 2025 ACFR. It's not a material number, and so we disagreed. We're just going to move on. It's not material. And then last but not least, the bullet at the bottom of this slide about auditor independence. Of course, we have to be independent of the district. We have to be independent in order to render our opinion on the district's financial statements. We meet not only all of the ethical requirements that the AICPA has for us, but also in accordance with government auditing standards that imposes even stricter rules about things that we can and cannot do for an auditee. So we meet all of those requirements in order to be able to opine on the district's financial statements. A few slides here. This is revenues and expenditures in the school district's general fund for the last 5 years. Really what we look for in this slide is, or what I typically would when I look at one of these slides for a state and local government or for a school district, is we look for big swings, right? We don't want to see big swings in revenues where one year we've got revenues way exceeding expenditures or vice versa. And we certainly don't want to see a consistent year over year over year over year, significant expenditures exceeding revenues. I mean, essentially what we're getting into is if we're seeing expenditures vastly outstripping revenues, we're spending into fund balance, we're potentially getting into deficits and those types of things. And what we see over the last 5 years is the district, it looks like the district does a fairly good job of budgeting, and revenues and expenditures are about equal over the last 5 years. So we see very, very consistent results each year in the district's general fund. This slide here compares fund balance, which is that what's left. So fund balance is kind of what's left over. When you look at the governmental fund, specifically the general fund, it's not just cash, it's what's left over when you look at the general funds, cash and other current assets, investments, accounts receivable, amounts that are due to the district at year end, and then subtract out the liabilities that are there. What do we owe? What payables do we have? Accrued payroll and those things. What's left over? That's fund balance. And so we look to see how does fund balance compare to expenditures? And we've got a slide that puts this a bit more into context in a minute, but the district's expenditures have grown over the last 5 years, and the district's fund balance has grown, and as we'll see in a couple of slides, it remains a fairly consistent measure of overall expenditures each year. Ending fund balance in the general fund for fiscal year 2024 was just right around $114.5 million. That's ending fund balance. Again, important to note that that's not just cash on hand. That is ending fund balance, which is all of your current assets less your current liabilities. Increase in fund balance of about $9.7 million from 2023 to 2024. And when you put that into context here with this slide, I think this is potentially the most important one, where you look at your fund balance as a percentage of current year expenditures. Even with all of the growth over the last 5 years, the district's fund balance as a percentage of its current year expenditures and transfers out remains just between 30 and 32% of annual outflows from the general fund. So the state has a required minimum. The district is well in compliance with that. The state's required minimum is only 1 month, so just 8 1/3%. The GFOA, the GFOA has various recommendations. Of course, they'll tell you that it depends, government to government, district to district, but their recommendation is to have no less than 2 months in your fund balance, about 17 to 20%, and the district is again at about 32% at June 30th, 2024.
Is there any recommendation about a maximum amount that would be looked upon favorably? So obviously a district doesn't want to have 100% in fund balance.
So that's a good question, and that's a question that I get a lot. And the short answer to that is it depends, right? It depends on what we're doing with the fund balance. So sometimes you can have years where, okay, we're going to build our fund balance up significantly over several years because we know we're going to be self-funding some capital projects. Maybe we'll want to self-fund projects versus having to go to the bond market and borrow money on it. So there might be years where fund balance looks like it's growing a ton, and then we're planning to spend it down in 4 or 5 years to do big capital improvements. I mean, certainly I think you would not want to get to a place where we're just continually running significantly high. Then potentially we need to look at, okay, where are our revenue sources, where are our expenditure sources, how do we adjust those to maybe get them more in line with our current and future spending plans. But I don't think there's necessarily a magic number that you would say, okay, at this level, we would say, that's too much.
Gotcha. Thank you.
How about an average? What do you typically see besides the state recommended? If the districts are above that, what's kind of that comfort zone?
So, I mean, I'm a pretty risk-averse person, so it's hard for me to put myself in the district's shoes and say this is what it would be. I mean, when I think about if I try to put myself in Jennifer's shoes and say, okay, what am I most concerned about? What's the economy going to do? What are property values going to do? I mean, what's going to happen in the next 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9 years? To the extent that any of us can answer any of those questions, who knows? But I think. That GFOA recommendation of 2 months, I mean, I think if it was me and they were my financials, I'd probably want to be more in the 3 to 4 months, just to be able to say, look, if there's a shock to our revenues, if there's a change in the timing of things, if all of a sudden, I think about, I was in our Atlanta office for a lot of years and worked with some large school districts in the metropolitan Atlanta area. There was a huge problem one year with one of the big counties in metropolitan Atlanta levying the property taxes. And so districts were went almost 90 days longer than they normally did to get their property tax money in. Well, one of my districts had to go and get a TAN, a tax anticipation note. They had to borrow money that essentially kind of gave them a stopgap to when the tax money came in, they could pay the TAN off. I mean, stuff like that happens sometimes, and it may not be anybody's fault, but certainly the more you have in fund balance built up to withstand any sort of shocks in that revenue timing can certainly give you the ability to sort of stand on your own if something like that were to happen. Okay. So this slide here and the next one really is just informational purposes for you all. I mean, I could stand up here and talk for a while about new GASB standards, but that's not what y'all want me to do. But next year, I mentioned that compensated absences. That'll be a new standard. It's going to change how governments have to measure this liability that they've used and they've recorded for years. I don't expect a huge change for school districts in South Carolina, but I think we're still kind of waiting and seeing on that. But that'll be a new change for next year. There are a couple of other GASB standards out there that will have an impact on the district's financial statements, but we got a couple of years on those as well. And then just, again, by way of introducing us to you and letting you all know, we do free quarterly continuing education for all of our governmental clients. The classes are all held over Zoom. The vast majority of the time, they're technical accounting topics, so no offense if you don't want to come. I totally understand. But we do periodically have presentations from our advisory folks about risk management, best practices with budgeting, forecasting, all those types of things. And so if you do have any interest in getting on our email distribution list for that, if you'll get your contact information to Jennifer, I can make sure to get it added to our system to where we can make sure to reach out when we're going to have our next quarterly course. And with that, again, I'm happy to take any additional questions that you all might have for us.
Board, do you have any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Thank you very much to everybody that put this together, because this would make my head spin. Just reading it makes my head spin. Can I ask a couple of questions about the actual report that we have on some things that weren't in the presentation this evening? And I'm on page 13 of the actual report. Under the general fund budgetary highlights, where it just talks about the differences in local revenue. Can you just speak a little bit to the trend that you all are opining on here?
Sure. Well, so you used a word that I don't like because you said opining, and the management's discussion and analysis is specifically not opined on.
Got it.
So,
thank you.
But I think with local revenues, with the vast majority of our school districts, especially in South Carolina, the biggest swing we've seen in local revenues over the last couple of years has been investment income. I mean, 2 years ago, everybody got killed on investment income because they were all, school districts and local governments are all required to hold very, very safe investments. They're all fixed income. And when interest rates rose very, very rapidly, if you're sitting there holding a piece of paper that's bearing interest at 2%, and now all of a sudden they're being sold in the marketplace at 4 or 5%, all of a sudden your 2% paper is worthless. And so those fair values of those investments went way down. That doesn't mean that you're not getting your money back at the end. The principal you're going to get back, that's all obligations of the U.S. government. Most of it is in the LGIP, which is managed by the state treasurer, and that fund is holding all of those fixed income investments. So the principal is all safe and guaranteed, but the investment income itself is what was way down. And over the last couple of years, not only as interest rates have stabilized, but as they've remained high, that investment income has continued to grow significantly over the last couple of years. So from a local revenue standpoint, that's probably been the most consistent trend we've seen. After that, with what people are doing with property taxes, it's kind of all over the map.
Thank you. One more question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And I don't have a page on the actual report for it. But when you see, and could we go back to the slide with the fund balance trends, the actual dollar amounts? Perfect. Thank you. I'm sorry, what? Slide 14. Thank you very much. Is it your recommendation, and this might be a question for Mrs. Miller instead, so feel free to send me her way.
If it's a recommendation, I probably am.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
When the board reviews the financial reports at the end of our packets, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that we get fund balance sheets or reports. Is that something that we should consider looking at on a consistent basis? Because I hear what you're saying about it's kind of a rainy day fund of sorts. But do we want to know what money's coming in and or going out on a more consistent basis? Other than at the end of every year, I guess.
Yeah, so what can be tricky about fund balance, like I've seen this both ways. So what can be tricky about fund balance, especially to give it to you all monthly or periodically, monthly, quarterly, throughout the year, what can be tricky about that, and I'll let you answer too, Jennifer, but what can be tricky about that is there's like at the year end, when you look at the actual ACFR, like when you look at the general fund, there's a lot of numbers on here that we don't potentially have every single month. Accrued payroll, accounts payable, a lot of those types of year-end numbers where we're making these year-end accruals, we have to go back and say, okay, this expense that we have pertains to last year, so we've got to book it back as a liability. And so I would feel the tension if I was the CFO of showing you a fund balance number throughout the year, and then all of a sudden getting to June and it looked like it went down a bunch just because we had month-end accruals. So there's that argument. The other ways I can see where it is where I see it tracked is, okay, we set out in our budget, we budgeted that we were going to appropriate $5 million of fund balance. So we're going to spend $5 million of fund balance this year. Then as you're getting those monthly budget to actual reports, tracking that, okay, how much are revenues exceeding expenditures or vice versa? We budgeted to use $5 million of fund balance this year. Are we in line with that? Are we falling behind and we're actually going to use more of it? I mean, those are the types of things that I think would probably be more valuable than just a number each month. But Jennifer, I'll also let you speak to that.
Thank you. I agree with what Mr. Lyons is saying about the monthly amount of the fund balance. There was a new proviso that was implemented for this fiscal year where we are reporting that to the State Department each month, and it does fluctuate significantly. The last amount, we're seeing $114 million. This evening when I was going to talk about the general fund budget reports you have, we're down to about $80 million right now. So it fluctuates significantly. That's a $35 million swing. And again, it's going to go back up, but it's the cyclical nature of governments. We're not going to receive our local revenue from tax dollars until starting in December, mostly in January.
Anyone else have anything for Mr. Lyons? Yes, Mr. Pizzuti.
I have a kind of a blanket statement, not really a question. Seeing this, it's kind of not rocket science that we see the fund balance is growing every year. And I just kind of would say, as we see this fund balance increase, we know that the district is in good hands when it comes to our fund balance. We're safe. So when the budget is getting prepared, I would hopefully like to see some of this fund balance getting used as either a way to increase our staff and teachers' pay or to probably bring down some of the millage if possible. So, I mean, we're showing $10 million a year constantly, and that trend hasn't stopped. So it's just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pizzuti. Mr. Lyons, thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Thank you all for having me.
Certainly. At this time, Dr. Postaway will introduce our speakers who are also from Malden and Jenkins and the purpose of this next presentation.
Thank you. And before we do that, I'd like to ask Ms. Miller and everyone who's here, who's part of the financial staff with Ms. Miller, to stand so that we can recognize the many, many hours and weeks of work that went into this report. Thank you all so much. When they came on the board, Ms. McCown and Mr. Rice both began asking a lot of questions about audits. And we were searching to try to find the areas which they might want to take a closer look at. So this evening's presentation is really as a result of their questions that they have asked and the continued encouragement to get to the bottom of questions that they continue to receive, I believe, about the district's finances. So we want to make sure that we do that, and one of the ways that they suggested we deal with this is to talk about the different kinds of audits so that we could identify what problem we're trying to solve, where we think we may have some issues, and find the right kind of audit to try to solve that problem. So we're very pleased this evening to have as the Government Advisory Director for Malden and Jenkins, Kate Russell, who's with us, and she comes to us, she heads that division for the entire company. She comes to us with over 24 years of experience as a partner in the Big Four. So we've almost all heard of Deloitte, Pricewater, Price House, Price Waterhouse, and Cooper, Ernst & Young, and KPMG. So we know that she comes to us with a tremendous amount of experience working across this country to help local entities, state and federal entities find exactly the approach that is correct for them and find the answers to their questions. So we welcome you. We're really happy that you're here. You have a very few slides, but they contain some really important information for us. Thank you, Ms. Russell.
Thank you. Thank you to the Board of Trustees, Superintendent Postlewaite, for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. To clarify, Superintendent Postlewaite's very generous introduction was for the partner who leads our practice, David Roberts. He is on jury duty this week and would probably much rather be here presenting to you than being on jury duty. But a little bit about myself, just as an introduction. So I am a director in the government advisory practice, and most of my consulting experience has been government advisory, but I came to Malden & Jenkins from the state of Georgia, where I was the CFO of an agency that administered, depending on the year, between about $80 and $100 million in federal and state funds to local governments, to cities, to counties, to councils of government, and to school districts. And so I have a lot of experience working with those agencies, not only looking at compliance and performance evaluations, but really thinking about operational efficiency and business process improvement. Really making sure as you're getting those funds, you're spending them in the most effective and efficient way possible, maximizing the results of those dollars in your districts and in your local communities. And so a few notes about our practice, since you just got an introduction from Tim about the audit and assurance practice. Government advisory is completely separate practice. We take the promise of independence very seriously when we do our work. So Tim and Brian and their team come in and do your financial audit every year. If we're brought on to do work, we bring a completely separate team. We do have some of the same financial and auditing skill sets, but we can also bring internal audit, government transformation, organizational design, business process improvement. We have a skill team. A number of folks came to our team from Big Four. And so we bring that team to bear to do a completely separate set of audits and reviews. All right, okay, I didn't kill it. I'm very good at killing these things. So when we think about audits, there are kind of two buckets, but they really exist kind of on what I would consider a continuum. And so the first type of audit is more of that compliance audit, right? So your compliance audit is asking very specific questions of, is this allowable? Is this legal? Is this correct? Is this right? And it also looks at very specific criteria. So, thinking about what Tim just presented in terms of your financial audit, it's answering that question of whether your financial statements are stated in accordance with the criteria that they're expected to be stated in. It uses sampling. It drills in on specific, positions, specific entries that you have in your system. It's also historical, right? It's looking back on the last year. It's taking a look at where you've been to make sure the processes you had were correct and led to the correct results. You also get into kind of other types of compliant or forensic audits, kind of in the middle here. And that's where you have, again, that very specific question. You have a belief that fraud has occurred, or you may have evidence that fraud has occurred, but you don't understand the depth or the magnitude of that fraud. So you would use a forensic audit to really drill down, to really help you define, was there fraud, was there waste, was there abuse? That also will assess the environment that led to it. What happened that allowed that fraud to occur? And what changes or what additional risk mitigation do you need to put into place to ensure it doesn't happen in the future? Again, forensic audits are very specific and very defined in their nature, so they're going to look at that one specific thing and only give you answers based on that one specific question that you ask. The third type of audit is really in that other bucket of audit, and it's what we consider transformation audits. And it really is the broadest type of audit, and it can answer a broader set of questions for you. It also thinks about your future state. So it's not really looking back to see what you've done and how you've done it, but it seeks to understand how do you do it currently, and what do you want to do in the future, and how is the best way for you to do it. So it's really future state focused. It's thinking about how do we enhance your operations? How do we enhance your organizational design? Are you implementing all the right leading practices for this school district to be the best version that you as a board want it to be? And so it is more tailored to understanding specifically your strategy, your strategic plan and vision for the district and its future, and helping come up with recommendations on how to move you there in an efficient and effective manner. And so I'll spend a little more time on this because I think this is the one that folks are the least familiar with. So when you're thinking about your operational and your performance audits, it is still objective. There are still methodologies, there are still criteria that we're looking at, but it may be broader in the types of information that we collect and the type of environment we seek to understand and define. And so we're going to look more at what are your current policies and procedures, what is your organizational structure, what's your service delivery model, what technologies are you using, how are you using them, if there are handoffs between different teams or different processes or different departments, is it a manual handoff, is it technologically driven workflow, how are we capturing that information and saving it? Do you have the right governance structure in place? Is everything actually being implemented as you've designed your governance and your policies and your procedures to actually happen day to day? And our goal in those is really to make sure we can answer three kind of big questions for you. And the first is what's working well about the department or the function that you've asked us to take a look at? What do we want to make sure we preserve because it is effective and it's efficient? We can also kind of answer what needs improvement. Maybe it's working fine, but there's a more effective or efficient or technologically savvy way you could be doing it. So we will think about that and work in concert with you to think about a future version of that. And then we always look for risk and concern. If we see something that does veer more into that compliance scope, as we're talking to people, as we're looking at information, we're going to bring that back to you. We're going to flag those areas of concern. And as applicable, we're going to work with you within our scope to address it. And if not, we can certainly discuss compliance reviews that would help address those types of concerns for the district. And again, our goal is to give you meaningful recommendations. At the end of all of our operational and performance audits, we give you what we call a strategic roadmap. I've been on the other side of these audits, and the last thing I want to give you is a 400-page books in, it's going to sit on your book stop. It's where you put your coffee every day. We want to make sure the ideas that we bring to you are actionable. We want to make sure you can take them and understand, do we need to implement a new workflow? Do we need to change who is responsible for this specific process? Do we need to add additional controls? So it's things that you can then assess and say, is this something we can implement in 90 days? Is this something we need to budget for next year, or is this something we need to add additional software or licenses to address? So that you understand the short term, the kind of medium term, and the long term options that you have for addressing these things and kind of some of the order that they may need to happen in so that you can move towards your desired future state. And then we have kind of 6 big goals, and I think the final is gives you that recommendation roadmap that you as a board and you as leadership can understand what the actionable next steps are. But we ask ourselves when we're thinking through those recommendations, are we driving towards optimizing efficiency and effectiveness for the district? Are we reducing risk and ensuring we're maintaining or enhancing your compliance state? Is what we're recommending going to help strengthen internal controls, your policies and procedures or processes, or your governance model? Does it increase transparency or accountability to you as the Board of Trustees, to your citizens and stakeholders in this community? Is there accountability for the action that's being taken? And then really, at the end of the day, does this enhance performance? Does this drive meaningful, tangible results for the district? Not just pie in the sky, we all feel good about it, but things that you can point to as a board and say, we know we've made a difference in this area because we've been able to implement these recommendations. And I hit a lot really quickly, but I know there's a lot for y'all to consider here, so I'll pause, happy to have discussion or answer any questions as appropriate.
Ms. Russell, thank you. Fellow board members, do you all have any questions for Ms. Russell at this time?
I just have one for now. If we looked into these further and decided to say the one that you went into, does that cover like the construction side also?
So it can, we would work with you to refine a scope. Some districts may want to start with one or two focus areas, focus departments, focus functions. Some prefer to do everything at once because there are some efficiencies to be gained that as we're working with one department and learning about handoffs or dependencies on another department, we can also reach out to that department within our scope and understand both sides of the conversation.
And I guess my only other question would be, between the three that you talked about, does one more look back? I know the one that you went into more looks forward.
So we always look back a few years. We want to understand your current state and kind of how it's evolved. Our typical practice is to look back 3 to 5 years. Obviously, COVID kind of throws an asterisk in some of our look back, and we always account for that. But we want to make sure the current state represents how it came to be and anything we may need to be aware of in terms of maybe you've deployed a new financial software or payroll system that would impact how you're doing today in terms of current processes and organizational structure. So there is a look back component. Typically when we issue our reports, our narrative includes kind of statements of our understanding of the current state of the processes or the functions that you've asked us to look at. So then you'll also have a takeaway that captures in writing the current state baseline that you're starting from as you move towards your desired future state.
Sorry, I forgot one more thing. What, can you give us any idea of what something like this would cost?
So it depends. I'm going to give you the auditor's answer. It depends on how deep you want us to go, how many departments or functions that you want us to look at. This is the type of work I personally love to do, so we want to work with you. So if the district is price sensitive, you can certainly give us your wish list, and we can work with you on what your highest priorities are and make sure we're delivering as much as we can within the budget you have.
Ms. Russell, I have a couple questions also.
Yes, sir.
So typically with you all doing these different type audits, in your experience, have you all worked to a point where the district contracts with you to do the audit to please the board, or do you all contract at times directly with the board so that you report to the board based on that scope that they have defined? I wonder, do you all do both of them, or is there one that you've kind of seen as a best practice?
We've done both. Different boards of trustees also have different setups. So sometimes we have been contracted by the internal audit function and we report to them to report to the board. We have been contracted directly by the board. We may be contracted by a specific department. What we typically ask, especially for contracted by the board, is there is still a sponsor or someone who can be our day-to-day liaison as we have questions, as we need to collect information. But all of our reports will go back to the board. We're always happy to do presentations where we go into detail about what the scope was, what our approach was, what we found, kind of defining that current state and answering all of those questions for you specifically.
And I guess the other question is, many times, obviously we as Board of Trustee members, we hear feedback from the community. Some of the feedback we hear, they're just rabbit trails.
Sure.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, some of them are rabbit trails, but some of them there may be some validity because either they misunderstood something or it's the way we represent things. Mm-hmm. I guess as you're trying to scope an audit, like to me, I've noticed you said in the slide, forensic audit is when you typically expect waste or fraud or something like that has happened. I think in a lot of cases what we're thinking of is, I can't speak for the whole board, but I'm saying what we're thinking of is almost a special audit, almost a laser-focused audit on, I'd like you to look at this and make sure there's nothing that, there's no stone unturned here, so we're armed with the information we need to say to the public, hey, look, this is what we looked at, this is what we scoped. So I guess my question is, a lot of times as a board member, you know what you want to look at, but you may not know it in financial terms. Do you all work with a board to help develop and refine what that scope really is,
Yes.
what they're trying to get to?
Absolutely. So when we write a scope, we're going to lay out for you very specifically what we are going to include when we look at it. Is it going to include specific financial data? Are we going to look at transactions as well as general process and environment? We would spell that out in that scope of work, the specific steps and those outcomes.
So if you were, and just like what Ms. McCown said, if you were looking at something like construction projects that have already taken place, obviously there's records, there's receipts, things like that. If you wanted to do that, that's basically a special audit. Or I guess if you wanted to look at something like procurement cards, P cards, that would be another separate special audit. So they wouldn't necessarily fall underneath these three buckets.
So those,
how would you
depending on
classify
how
that?
you would want to scope them, those could be compliance, but they could also be compliance and performance. So if you just want to know black and white where all of the rules follow, you know, we can answer that question. In some cases, Tim and Brian's team may be better suited to answer that question. Okay. But if you want more root cause analysis of, if you have some heartburn over something and want to know, is the process the best it can be? Are we capturing information and presenting it as transparently as we should be? That's where that combination of the compliance and performance audit comes into play, because you're looking not only at the end result, but all of the process and those business process efficiencies as well.
And I guess my last question is, once you define that scope, you all do that audit, do you also provide almost a communications piece in a simple layman's language so that a board of trustee member could explain to the public and the community, here's what we looked at, here's what we saw? I guess I'm just kind of,
absolutely.
We don't do this, but you all
yeah,
do,
so
but we need your help.
Yeah, our goal when we write our report and in any presentation that we do is we want to make it as accessible as we can. We never want it to feel jargony. We never want, you know, your parents or your teachers or your stakeholders in the district looking at it and being uncertain what we're trying to say. Okay. So we always keep that, and we also keep a media lens to make sure it's going to be accessible to media if there is any need to present this publicly, but that it all stands alone and doesn't require that nuance or that additional messaging for it to be understood.
Okay, and I said last question, but I think this is the last question. So obviously your firm, we love to have you all. You have contracted with us. You do our annual audit. But if you have this special audit, how do you differentiate between, hey, we did this special audit and it is separate from this annual audit that we're doing? I mean, I guess I don't want to confuse people to say, well, we did an audit, it was clean, but then you're looking at this over here. So how do you vet that to explain that?
Sure. So for one, we always have two separate contracts, so it's very clear they're two independent scopes. Everything that we do is also vetted by an independence partner so that there is no question about whether or not there's any potential overlap between the financial audit that's performed and any work that we do. Typically, when we write our reports, we clarify very specifically that this is not part of the financial statement audit. It is a specific scope with specific objectives and specific results that will be communicated separately.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the clarity you brought to various kinds of audits tonight. And I just wanted to introduce to the board Beth Marsh, any of her staff who are here tonight, and mention that if we were depending on the cost as we work on the scope, something like this would need to go out on a request for proposals. And then it would go through the procurement process, just to clarify for everyone. That's the way this would work, and we certainly look forward to further discussion with the board in January regarding next steps, whether there are next steps that the board wants to take. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Russell, and thank you, Dr. Postaway. Moving on to item 10.3, our report on the demographic study analysis. Mr. Clark Cooper, our Chief Operations and Student Services Officer, will introduce our demographers.
Thank you, Ms. Henson. And tonight I would like to both welcome and introduce Mr. Christopher Dick, CEO of Demographic Analytics Advisors. DAA has performed as our contractor for the demographic study. Board, you will recall, in the fall of 2023, funds were approved from fund balance to procure a firm to perform a demographics analysis for Lexington School District 1 to assist in long-term planning. It has been our pleasure to work with Chris and his team on this project for the last 6 months, and we look forward to his presentation tonight. What you will hear and see are highlights of a very comprehensive report, which you will also receive. Additionally, this report will inform the facility study, which is being conducted by McMillan Pasden Smith Architecture. At this time, I'll turn the presentation over to Chris.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the board, Superintendent-elect, and thank you so much to Mr. Cooper and his team. They have been fantastic in getting me everything I need to do this work, which I can't say always. It's sometimes very hard to get, so you guys have done a great job there. So a little bit about us. The Demographic Analytics Advisors team, we bring decades of experience working on demographic forecasting and districting use cases in the public, nonprofit, and private sectors. I'd say the majority, 75% of our clients are K-12. So we do a ton of forecasting as well as districting and helping with facility studies with our architecture firms. We merge state-of-the-art methodology with collaborative engagement to really generate our best results, and that's where it's been great to go back and forth with the district and with other folks in the community. A little bit about me, my background. I'm a trained demographer and data scientist. I started this company after spending the start of my career at the Census Bureau, where I actually ran the program that does forecasting for the United States, as well as spent some time at Georgetown as a senior fellow in the Massive Data Institute. A little bit of our outline today. I'm going to go quickly through background and goals, a little bit about what we took into consideration, some of our forecast results, and then finally kind of tie it up with how we actually got there, the actual methodology and assumptions. As Mr. Cooper said, this is a very brief piece of a much longer report. So if you have further questions, we do have some appendix materials that we can talk about today. Okay, so background and goals. The goal of this process is to develop a reasonable enrollment forecast that takes into account kind of four key different things here. Really important for your school district, development and migration. COVID-19, decline and rebound, we saw in a lot of school districts. There was a decrease in enrollment when COVID first hit, and then there was a bounce back. If you just forecast based on those trends, we don't need to get in the weeds of this, but you can get some really silly results. So we really have to look at that and make sure that we're taking it into account. We also need to look at the impact of private, charter, and homeschools, as well as historic enrollment patterns. Here we're really trying to also highlight areas of concern for over or underutilization of school capacity, and that's really where we get into that facilities study. Okay, I always like to start with some kind of baseline setting here. What is an enrollment forecast and what isn't it? So what is it? It's a scientific most likely scenario based on all inputs of what enrollment will look like, in our case, yearly for the next 10 years. It's an extremely useful planning tool if used correctly and questioned. So please always feel free to ask us questions. What isn't it? It is not a magic solution that's going to tell someone with complete accuracy down to this one student what enrollment is going to be in 10 years. But it also is not a random and wild guess at what enrollment is going to be. There's a lot of science behind this. Okay, so what are some of the things that we're really taking into account here when we ran this specific forecast? So we looked first and foremost at historical enrollment patterns. We also wanted to look at school capacity as well as your attendance zones as they currently stand, as well as how they've changed over time. We want to look at demographic processes. So very important for schools, we want to know how many births are happening in your community. We also want to know how many people are moving into your community or moving out. And then we want to have some breakdowns of age. Age is very important to us, and then as well as sex, race, and Hispanic origin. We also need to look at the built environment. For Lexington, for a lot of my other clients, this is key because you are a growing county and a growing school district. So we need to look at building permits, but we also need to look at known development areas. Basically, what is your pipeline for development, as well as estimating timing. We also look at economics, and again, I note the impacts of the COVID pandemic. Okay, so I'd like to say I'm a total bottom line up front guy, but if that was the case, I would have put this in the very first slide. But I'm generally a pretty bottom line up front guy. So let's go to the district-wide forecast just to start here. And you're going to note here we have by grades. I did notice, sorry, the grades are out of order, but they are not on the next slide. This is your historical data from 2015-16 through the current school year. And as we can see here, year over year kind of percent change, we're anywhere from, a very kind of smallish negative change of negative 3.3 all the way up to, a 3% positive change. In general, in most years, your school district, you all know this, your district, has been up over the last several years. As we go into the forecast, we are forecasting basically more of the same. We are forecasting that this growth is going to continue, and in some ways actually increase over time if you start adding up those percentages. If we want to look at this in a kind of graphical approach, this is the next 10 years. If you look at the line, the solid light blue line on the left-hand side, that's actual data. Everything in the dotted line there is our forecast. And again, we're looking at about anywhere from a 1.5% to 2% increase year over year for enrollment. But there are a couple things that we need to understand. Number one, these enrollment increases are not equally distributed throughout your school district, and they're not even necessarily equally distributed throughout elementary versus middle versus high school. Students actually age through that process. So let's go ahead and start with the elementary schools. Y'all have a good number of elementary schools here. I know it's relatively hard to read. This will be available in print. But I do want to point out kind of what we're looking at in the table here. This is enrollment, either actual or forecasted for select years. And then we have on the very right-hand side the change for the current school year versus the 26-27, so 2 school years from now. So you can kind of see where schools are growing, as well as if there are schools that are declining just a bit. We're going to look at this in different ways in each of these slides here. So I love maps. Everyone loves maps. But one of the things that we like to do is to not just look at enrollment. We also want to look at, just looking at enrollment by itself is interesting, but doesn't really tell us a whole lot. We need to know how much built environment we have for students. So we want to look at utilization, which is simply the number of students divided by the capacity of a school. You're going to note that we have 3 capacity numbers on the table on the right here. The first is total capacity, the second building, and the third portable. Total capacity is simply building plus portable capacity. For elementary schools, as you're going to see, we're going to have 2 slides with maps on them. And the first one is looking at utilization, so that enrolled students divided by capacity for total capacity. The next one we're going to look at is just for buildings. For middle and high schools, we're only going to look at building capacity, mostly because if I didn't, I'd have 100 slides. So a couple things to note here. We really like to use kind of the stoplight idea. And really in a growing school district, what we're generally looking for is green, or like we're in a good spot here, is somewhere between 70 to about 85% utilization is kind of like we can keep moving on this. Anywhere from 85 to 95%, we want to start thinking, okay, what are our plans here to deal with potential overutilization? And then anything above 95%, we kind of want to start saying, all right, we need to do something here. I also like to color in orange any schools that are below 70% utilization. That's where we start kind of thinking, is this school fully utilized? Do we need to think about kind of what we're doing here as well? So as you can note, if we're looking at total capacity, which is building plus portables, we already have a couple schools that are in the red, several schools that are in the yellow, and just a few schools that are in the orange. But if we take away portables, the argument is slightly different, right? So you'll have a decent number of portables, especially in your elementary schools. So here we see that utilization, if we look only at building capacity, we're already in the red throughout the majority of the north half of the district, and that is going to increase over time. So you can see that by 2034, the majority of the elementary schools, if you just look at the buildings, are in that red. Finally, I know I'm just giving you the same stuff over and over again, but people digest things differently. This is a table of that kind of same information, but single years, and it can give you the same idea. So for instance, we can see that Gilbert Elementary School in this year is about 93% utilized from a total capacity, so building plus portables. We're forecasting that to be 107% utilization by the end of the forecast period. If we look only at buildings, we can pick out another one here. We can take a look at, for instance, Oak Grove, which is already at 115%. We have growing actually to 130% of utilization by the end of the period, if we're looking strictly at the buildings, not taking portables into account. So that's elementary schools. We also did the same forecast for middle schools. Again, same layout of the tables. And here we can see that we have growth rates anywhere from a negative 5.2% over the next couple of years, all the way up to 6.3% for Carolina Springs is kind of what we're looking at over the next 2 years that we're forecasting. But you can also look at these change rates over the full period. And sometimes those tell different stories based on development. We'll talk about why that's the fact, why that's occurring here in a few minutes. So again, we're not going to look at total capacity at this time. We're only going to look at building capacity. Again, just not enough slide time. But here we can see that the issues of utilization in middle schools are not quite as bad as in elementary schools, though we're getting there, especially toward the end of the period, looking kind of towards the north and west especially. And again, we can look here at the tables. Finally, I want to get to high schools. I want to make sure we have some time for questions as well. But we're looking here, again, same table, but for high schools. And we're looking at anywhere from a positive 4.3% growth at Gilbert High School over the next couple of years to a bit of a decline in Pelion. Again, we're only going to look at building capacities for high schools, but here we are definitely a bit more overutilized already for some of these building capacities than we were for the middle schools, and that's going to continue to be the case throughout the period. Oh, that jumped like 3 at a time there. Sorry about that. And then we have the table here again. Again, only building capacity. If we're looking at, say, Gilbert High School, at the very top here, we're already over 100%. We're saying we're going to be, probably about 150%. And that has a lot to do with the development that is occurring in that area. Likewise, if we look at Lexington High School, we're going from 120-ish today up to about 140% utilization. Okay, so how did we get there? If I can get this thing to click. I want to talk, first of all, a little bit about a couple assumptions that we made about development specifically, and then I want to talk about the methodology we used to get there. So one of the things that we find very, very important, especially in a growing place like Lexington 1, is to take very seriously the impact of development on school forecasts. But we can't just say you're going to have, 10,000 new houses, therefore you're going to have some multiplier of that students. What we need to start thinking about is how that housing growth is actually going to occur. So a couple simplifying assumptions that we generally have to make. Number one, not all developments are completed, right? That just happens. Things happen when you're building a development, and sometimes things fall through. So our assumption here is that 80% of approved housing that is in the pipeline right now will be built by 2035. We're also assuming that at least some of that currently approved housing will begin hitting the market before the beginning of next school year. We also need to understand how those houses will be occupied, at which rate, and what type of people, what ages of people will be in those households. So we look at occupancy rates and persons per household by age. And specifically, we really look at persons per household from ages 5 to 18. And so our general argument here is that occupancy rates and persons per occupied housing unit by age will follow historical patterns. And basically what we mean there is we take the last 2 best pieces of data that we have, the 2010 decennial census as well as the 2020 decennial census. We look at how that's changed because there has been development here, and that has changed age patterns in Lexington 1. And so we basically forecast out what those occupancy rates and persons per household by age will look like over the next 10 years. We also do not assume that all houses that are built will be built on day one in a development. We assume that in year one, there will be about 10% of their final occupancy built. And then we do kind of a linear growth extrapolation out through 4 years and then assume full occupancy beyond that. But when we say full occupancy, just to be very clear back from number 2, we do not say that every single house will have a person in it. Each place has vacancy rates applied to them or occupancy rates on the other side. So those are all key pieces that we're taking into account here. I say all of this mostly because sometimes people say, wow, that's a lot of growth. And you know, this is, we're being, frankly, a bit conservative about the growth that we're applying here. Okay, so what is our baseline methodology? If you all have heard anything from demographers doing this type of work before, you may have heard of a grade progression methodology. It's a fancy term for basically saying how many students go from a grade in year 1 to that grade plus 1 in year 2. So how many kindergartners turned into first graders? And basically what we're looking at is the ratio between those two things. So if you have 100 kindergartners, the next year you have 110 first graders, your ratio is going to be 1.1, and that tells us something. If you have more kindergartners than first graders, either students are moving in or students are making different choices than they were making before, or students and their parents. So that could be, you know, they were in a charter or private school, they've decided to come to public school. So what we do is we start with something we call a weighted grade progression methodology. Basically, we're looking at several years of that ratio for each grade, for each school, for each feeder pattern. And then we are forecasting that grade progression ratio for each of those grades. We tested so many, you know, I told Mr. Cooper that we probably ran about 50 different models to do this. But we tested many different weighting regimes as well as many different types of modeling. And we basically ended up with a 5-year weighted average with weighted data skewed a little bit more to more recent data. But the really great thing about a grade progression ratio methodology is that it takes into account everything that has happened in the past and assumes it's going to happen in the future. Like, that's the key part of the methodology. Well, if you are experiencing more development than you have in the past, it is not going to do a good job forecasting your enrollment. And I've seen this happen in very bad ways in school districts. Likewise, if you're losing people, it will not do well. So what we need to do is we need to add in a housing-based growth by attendance zone, and that's what we talked about in those assumptions above. However, you can't just straight add those numbers to our baseline forecast because you have been experiencing some growth already. So basically what we have to do is we have to go in and look at how many of the students are already captured in our GPR methodology and only add in additional students based on the housing growth. So we have a process to go through that. I can talk about it more in the questions, but it gets a little into the weeds. So I just want you to know we're taking it into account. So with that, I will go ahead and stop and see if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah.
Board members, do you have any questions at this time? Mr. Pizzuti?
I don't have a question, but I do want to say thank you for this, because as someone that lives out in Gilbert, we see the growth, but actually seeing it on paper and in red, it kind of, I look at our Gilbert principals out there and their eyes get real big too when these come up. So I want to appreciate it for bringing the actual data to us, because,
Yep.
I mean, we knew it, but I didn't know it was like that. So thank you.
Of course.
Yes.
I just want to thank you for this as well. It's very helpful. I really appreciated what Mr. Cooper said about this working in tandem, and correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, with the facilities study. Right. Can you elaborate on how the two will work together? Because I'm not a huge fan of things existing in vacuums, so I think sometimes we could look at these numbers and say, we have to do this because of this. So I'd like to better understand that, if you don't mind.
Yes, ma'am. The demographic study and the facility study are a collaborative effort, obviously procured independently, and as you obviously know, because Chris is here today with the kind of the culminating presentation, the demographic study that analysis has completed. That information informs the facility study, which has just begun. So Mr. Dick and McMillan Pasden Smith administrators, they're working together on making sure they have all of Chris's information for anticipating the facility needs for the district moving forward. So this was step one. That does then feed that facilities assessment. The facilities assessment is it's more of the boots on the ground of actually looking at the brick and the mortar of everything that exists in this district in terms of how do we accommodate those numbers. What do our existing facilities have? What do we need to do to maintain them? Where can we make additions? Where do we need to look at finding new solutions to serve our students in this district? So having this high quality, very scientific, also I'll pull a word that Chris used, reasonable assessment of growth in the district then informs that facilities study to make those same types of informed, smart, reasonable recommendations for what this district and this board would consider to be able to serve the students of this moving forward in the next 3, 5, and 10 years.
So, Mr. Dick, I have a question. On several of your slides where you show, like, say, for instance, middle school enrollment on slide 20, 2019, 2020 through 2035, 36. Yeah, so you can, let's see. Right, yeah, so right here. I was just noticing the percentage column on the end where you show, like, some schools are 3.4%, some are 3.0%. But looking at the heading in the column, it says percent change 26-27 versus 24-25.
Correct.
So are you basically just comparing a range from where we are in this school year to just 2 years from now, even though you show a projection out through 2035?
Yes, exactly. And the reasoning behind this is we like to look at the short-term change a lot in these presentations, because it's often what we're thinking about what we're going to do in the short term, and then we're thinking what we're going to do in the long term. In the more full report, there's several change columns. So there will be more than just that. But yes, you're exactly correct. This is just short-term change.
Okay, because I know you don't have a crystal ball to look at everything in the future,
yep.
And you're having to project. But when I see those percentages, I'm going, oh, now this school is really, really growing, but really you're looking at a short range. I'm not looking at this first number down to this last number.
Yeah, so that's that's really, really growing in 2 years.
Okay.
Yep.
Anyone else? Mr. Dick, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you all.
All right, we will be moving on to agenda item number 11, which is our superintendent's report. So I will turn it over to Dr. Postlewaite.
Thank you, Mrs. Henson. The board has heard 3 really important reports tonight, and the large part of the superintendent's report is a 4th. So I will start by saying my first slide has to do with what impacts learning most. So if we could advance to the next slide, past the title slide, please, Daniel. Thank you. We know from multiple studies that quality teachers in classrooms are the #1 in-school factor that impacts student learning. And of course, those teachers need highly capable people supporting their work. So the most important part of the superintendent's report tonight are the recommendations coming from the Salary Study Committee that were led by Dr. Price. So very quickly, I will simply mention a couple things and then hand it off to Dr. Price. On the next slide, I wanted to just mention that we've talked with board members about the new board member orientation dates, and I'd ask you to note that on March 13th, the date that works best for us, the time that works best for us is a luncheon meeting. And I wanted to make sure that those of you who work full-time during the day have ample notice of that and opportunity to let us know if that will work for you. And then on my final slide, it's just the proposed book study schedule. Daniel, if you could advance a couple slides, that would be wonderful. I don't have a clicker tonight. Thanks. My final slide is There we go. The book study schedule, and every board member already knows what section he or she has agreed to lead, and there we have the dates of the workshops where we would set aside about 30 minutes to complete the book study. So with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Price and the members of the Salary Study Committee.
Thank you, Dr. Postlewaite, and good evening, Madam Chair and ladies and gentlemen of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you tonight recommendations for salaries on behalf of a diverse group of faithful Lexington One employees who, as we learned, are invested in the recruitment and retention of high-quality staff throughout our district. They have dedicated many hours, both in committee meetings and of their own personal time, to this initiative. Our committee was given 2 primary goals and 2 deadline parameters. We were asked to use appropriate market comparators to make priority recommendations for salary adjustments. The committee studied scales from other Midlands districts as well as districts roughly the same size as Lexington One around South Carolina. We also looked at the variance differences in step increases from one year of experience to the next. We were also tasked with studying our hard-to-fill and hard-to-keep positions to see if there might be some salary supplements we could consider that would aid in recruitment and retention efforts. We had established meeting dates with a goal of presenting our results to you this evening. As mentioned earlier, we had a very diverse group of Lexington One family members involved with this study, including 2 board members. Some of those folks are here with us tonight, and I'd like to take this opportunity to ask them to stand so that they can be recognized and appreciated for their time commitment that they put into this study. So if you would, Salary Study Committee members, please stand. We divided our committee into 3 working groups and gave everyone a choice of which group they would like to join. One focused on teacher salaries, which make up 55% of our employees. One focused on support staff salaries, which made up about 35% of our employees. And one focused on special supplements for hard-to-fill positions. With 37 different scales to explore, this group did a lot of work in a short time, and we also identified other areas to explore and consider in the future. In our first meeting, we shared a lot of scales and philosophies behind annual step increases. We explored funding sources and other district scales. In our second meeting, we broke out into the 3 groups mentioned earlier and really dove into the creation of goals for our district. The groups identified their top 3 priorities to carry forward for the board's consideration. This meeting was very productive, and it was due in large part to the independent work that committee members did between the first and the second meetings. And then in the final meeting, we reviewed our compiled recommendations and discussed final adjustments to the presentation. And at this time, I will turn it over to our next presenter, Mrs. Savannah Blackwell from Pillion Elementary.
Good evening. My name is Savannah Blackwell. As mentioned, I am a kindergarten teacher at Pillion Elementary School. I have been a teacher in Lexington One for almost 14 years, but I have grown up in the Lexington One community my entire life. I attended all of the White Knoll schools, so I've been a part of this community for a very long time. Within the Salary Study Committee, I was part of the teacher focus group, and we came up with some priorities that we felt were important for the teacher scale. And one of them was to maintain a $2,000 cushion above the starting salary on the state minimum scale. And that's just to ensure that we stay competitive with other districts within the Midlands. Also, another priority is to include a steady percentage instead of a fading percentage. And that would be a 1.1% increase between steps, and that's to keep it pretty consistent among the pay scale. And then also examine years 20 through 30 step increase as well.
All right, good evening. I'm Kimberly Freeman. I work with our Human Resources team, and I'm just going to talk you through a couple of the options that we're going to bring before you tonight relative to the certified salary schedule. As Savannah just mentioned, we looked at a number of things that exist within our current scale, including that our percentage between steps is not very consistent across the scale. There are a number of reasons for that. One of them is anytime we apply a dollar amount increase to our per cell salary schedule, that's going to kind of invert percentages across the scale. So you're going to see a little bit of that in those recommendations. Another thing that we looked at was relative to that 20 to 30-year step increase. So I know you can't read those numbers on the screen, or at least I know I can't. They say the eyes are the first thing to go, and I'm living that right now. But what you do see there, right, we have screenshot on purpose for you steps that's 14 to 35 there. So you see that 20 to 30-year range included. We're going to look at two different options of a potential salary schedule. Everything in orange in the first option I'm going to show you is where applying a consistent percentage steps to step actually has what we're going to call a negative impact on some of our cells, and we're going to look at why. But what it illuminates to you is that when our team said, hey, we need to look at steps 20 to 30 because things get a little bit wonky there, that's my very official mathematic definition, okay? That we lived that out as we applied that, and so you're going to see that on the next two slides. In your packet, I believe you have a link. Daniel, if we can go to the next slide. You have a link to the scale if you want to look at it a little larger, but this is applying that consistent 1.1% increase cell to cell. Now, importantly, this is a draft that really is about methodology as much as it is about a starting salary amount. So we are bringing to you tonight a draft scale that lives under an assumption that what we're hearing about a teacher salary schedule beginning at $50,000 ultimately becomes a reality in the legislative session. We've heard Superintendent Weaver as recently as this week speak about that, but we don't know what that's going to look like yet. So if we hear a different salary amount come from the General Assembly, then we would potentially have to revisit the starting amount. So we just wanted to make sure we communicate this is based on kind of that $50,000 that we hope we see become a reality. So with that in mind, if we started our bachelor's salary schedule for our bachelor step 0 at $52,000 and applied a consistent 1.1 per cell increase, you would see the draft that's before you right now. Everything in orange represents a cell that would be less, considering this methodology, than the current year. So for example, if you look at the doctorate, just because that one's the closest to us, the doctorate step 16, currently that's $77,842. If we start and apply that consistent 1.1% increase, that would be $77,806. So it's not that that employee would not get a raise, but they would not get the raise they're anticipating based on this year's salary schedule, which is concerning, right, for our folks. So when we looked at all of that, and Ms. Price, who's our lovely mathematical financial support in this process, we want to actually put an option B in front of you and explain to you the difference in those two, okay? We know, because the data is clear from our state interviews that we've conducted the last couple of years, from the Teacher Working Conditions Survey, from other surveys and research that we're reading, our teachers who are the most concerned about their financial stability are our early career teachers. And it makes sense, right? 1.1% off of $52,000 looks a lot different than 1.1% off of $75,000 looks, okay? And so what we looked at here in this approach is considering steps 0 really steps 1 to 5 at a 1.5% per cell increase. Then we would move to that 1.1%, which would hold steady for steps 6 to 40. So it gives a little bit of an increased bump percentage-wise to those teachers who are in their first 5 years of teaching, which we know is so critical in terms of recruitment and retention. What you see happens there is that orange is mostly gone, okay? The teal that remains are the only cells that would have that same sort of implication. And just for your knowledge, the doctorate step 23 and 24, that's a combined total of 5 employees. Those 5 employees are very important to us, but we can talk about what we need to do relative to those 5 employees at some point, okay? The lighter cells that you see shaded are in our retention years, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. So there are potentially another 50 employees who could be impacted based on our current 5th-year retention that we will talk about before we finish tonight. All right? So those are options A and B that our salary study committee looked at after they made their recommendations, and after we sort of talked that through, and as we've continued to research and learn, the recommendation of the team is that we would bring to you option B, which would apply a very consistent methodology and percentage to the increase between cells, but would do it in a way that really considers that retention of those early career teachers. All right, Patrick, I'm going to toss it to you.
Good evening. My name is Patrick Witzerick. I've worked with school district for about 32 years now. I was at Lexington Middle School for most of those years, and I'll be honest with you, I'm just going to talk to you straight about this. Worked with wonderful people. My housekeeping staff that I had all these years, hardest working people you can imagine. Our maintenance staff at the maintenance shop, just as well. Being part of this meant a lot to me. At first, I didn't really know what I was getting into, to be honest with you. Casey Calhoun came to me one day and said, how would you like to be involved in something? I said, sure, why not? Let's go for it. So here I am. But being involved in this really kind of opened my eyes to some things. Some things I didn't recognize what the board goes through and what the superintendent goes through to try to make things happen. But after going through these meetings and everything, what we came up with was this. When the board provides raises, provide it for all classifications, all parts of classified. Standard step progression of 1.7%. Evaluate work calendars and pay grades to match work expectations. Under these things, we say consider strategic custodial expectations and compensation based on level of schools. What does that mean? The size of schools. We also looked at, when we had comparison of the districts, they look at a high school, middle school. You know, when you talk about those different levels, staffing is much more for a head custodian to take care of. A lot more programs at the high school and the middle school, those type of things. Consider the increased days for a certain number of housekeepers from 190 to 230. That would help us a lot because retention of housekeepers is a real challenge for us. We got some real great ones, and they'll come to me and say, look, I just need more hours. I'm working these other jobs, and sometimes we lose during the summertime because they'll work another job, grass is a little greener, they go for it. You can blame them on our day and time right now, the way things are. Review staffing formulations for all positions to ensure consistency and intentionality. I can't pronounce that, I'm sorry. But again, the formulas. Some of our schools, we're kind of stretched thin, being quite honest with you. You know, could use more staffing. We could possibly do in-house subbing that would help us because we have a sub problem to keep subbing going when we have people out. Everybody's got challenges in their families. Set minimum salary starting at $15.60 per hour and adjust scales accordingly after that. Of course, when years to come, hopefully the economy get better for everyone, things get better, more pay. So these are the things we kind of talked about and others. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Lisa Hartman. I have been a special ed teacher for 22 years, and I've been in the district for 19 years and have taught at White Knoll Middle School all 19 of those years in special ed. So special ed is very true to my heart. It's my passion, and I feel like in order to keep the special ed department as great as it is, with Dr. Adams and the rest of the special ed district, that these are the recommendations that we came with. To shift special education instructional assistance from a pay grade 7 to a pay grade 8 and move to 8 hours per day. Most of them are there 8 hours per day, just so we can meet with them to set about our day, so they know what the lesson plans are. So even moving them just to 8 hours per day and moving their pay grade up would be huge to them. It would help us, hopefully keep some of those positions and not have them leave year after year. We also talked about special ed teachers. So we have a lot of turnover in special ed, or we have a lot of just retention, keeping them, or even recruiting them to our district. So the committee discussed doing a stipend for special ed teachers. So the first year would be a $1,000 stipend. Year 2 would be a $2,000 stipend. And year 3 and above would be $3,000 each year. Have to be paid in December and have to be paid in May, so it would be split up. We think, the salary committee recommended that would entice special ed teachers to stay in our district and help to compensate for some of the paperwork and some of the extra duties that special ed teachers have. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Price. I'm the Director of Payroll, and I'm the lucky one that gets to talk about what all of these things will cost the district. So just so you know, the numbers here do reflect our fringe benefits and the salaries that would be affected. So the change into option B on the certified salary schedule will be about $7.6 million. Adjusting that support staff and bus driver salary schedule is going to cost about $2.1 million. And if we wanted to maintain those bump and hold, as Dr. Price calls them, the retention steps every 5 years, it's going to be about an additional $580,000. The special ed IAs, moving them from a grade 7 to grade 8 is about $333,000, and adding 30 minutes additional to their day is about $348,000. And that totals about $681,000 just for that one piece. And then the teacher supplement for our special education teachers is going to be about $1 million. And it is very important for you to realize that these expenses are above and beyond the current revenues, the revenues we are currently receiving. So in total, this totals, if we were to do everything all in 1 year, it would be about $12 million. So.
Well, as you can see, we had a lot of very passionate people when we started talking about this topic. And our meetings were anything but quiet. Once we launched the topics for discussion, we just kind of got out of the way. And I'd asked Mrs. Price to prepare a presentation for our hardest to fill and hardest to keep positions. And when I mentioned that, in unison, everyone in the room, before she even got a chance to present her data, was special ed. So it was kind of an obvious area that we wanted to focus on. But in addition to those items, we had some additional suggestions that came out of the working committee that maybe didn't make it into the top 3 priorities for each group, but wanted to be communicated just the same. One, there was a recommendation to eliminate the retention step, the bump and hold spot every 5 years. I believe this was introduced a few years ago as a retention incentive, but it has proven to be pretty confusing for folks, and they're oftentimes calling to find out, why did my pay not go up this year? And so it's because they got an extra bump the year prior, and then they were held at the same for the current year. So it was deemed to, according to the committee, not to be really serving its purpose. So to avoid confusion and to keep everything consistent as what was recommended, the recommendation was to eliminate that. As we move forward with this process, be sure to clearly communicate efforts to remain competitive, including information about how to raise salaries when not supported by state funding. That was one of Ms. Price's last comments, is what does that mean? Oftentimes, people may think that there's just a decision not to raise salaries, and it's not that simple. So it's important for us to make sure we communicate the funding methods and the actions that would need to take place in order to be able to do so. Set goals for certified salary schedule to be one of the highest in the Midlands, to keep Lexington One as an optimal place to live, work, and play. Consider phasing in this approach if needed, rather than, hey, we may not be able to afford it, so we're going to push it off. Rather than doing that, the recommendation was to consider a phase-in approach if we can't do it all at once. Authorize a future salary study on school administrator salaries, licensed professional salary schedules, and licensed school support salary schedules. Continue to examine other stipends and supplemental structures for other positions and advisors and coaches throughout the district. And then develop IEP assistance for new special education teachers and other retention type efforts that don't necessarily include pay. And then finally, consider increased administrative support in schools serving higher percentages of students with special needs. So although these things didn't make the top priority list, there are things that the committee thought were important for future consideration. So finally, a quick review. Did we accomplish our goals? And in review, that was to use appropriate market comparators and recommend priorities for salary adjustments, and then consider salary supplements for hard-to-fill positions. It's our hope that you feel our committee has achieved those two goals, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Dr. Price and everyone, it was a joy to serve on this committee with you. Board members, do y'all have any questions or comments for the committee?
I just have a question on your next to last slide when you talked about potentially authorizing a salary study for school administrator salary schedule, licensed professional salary schedule, licensed school support salary schedule. Could you give me an example of what positions would fit into each of those three categories?
Mrs. Freeman can.
Absolutely. The school administrator salary schedule would be our principals and assistant principals. Licensed professional salary schedules are positions like our physical therapist, occupational therapist, social workers. The licensed school support salary schedules would be our career specialist. So those are, and that's not an exclusive list, but those are the types of positions that are covered by those. So those are typically exempt positions, so they're not on our support staff salary schedule, nor are they represented on our certified schedule because they don't require teaching certification. They do, though, as their name indicates, require some sort of licensure or credential.
Okay, thank you. I would just say congratulations to everybody who worked on this. Looks like there's a lot of effort went into it. I think there's a lot of good ideas that you've brought to the table for the board to consider, and I know you had to take time out away from your regular day job to participate in this, and so just thank you for doing that. We appreciate you all bringing it to the board.
Absolutely, and you said that perfectly. Now we have a big task ahead of us to evaluate all of that. So, Dr. Postaway, Dr. Price, does that conclude?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you everyone again for coming tonight. All right, Dr. Postaway, does that conclude? Oh yes, let's clap for them. Thank you. Dr. Postaway, does that conclude your superintendent's report? Okay, board members, we're going to move on to item 12.0, which is our action items. First one is 12.1, the Be Smart Partnership. And in just a minute, Ms. Libby Roof will be talking about that. But first, do I hear a motion to approve the superintendent to sign the memorandum of understanding with the Be Smart organization?
Madam Chair, I move that we approve for the superintendent to sign the memorandum of understanding with the Be Smart organization.
Thank you, Ms. Shealy. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Pizzuti. Any discussion? I guess we will turn that over to Ms. Ruth.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and board members, Dr. Postaway, Dr. Price. I had a question that came in from Vice Chair Shealy about some stats on the Be Smart organization. So I wanted to provide that with you tonight. I have been familiar with this organization before I came to Lexington 1. They actually started as a grassroots volunteer organization. The local Be Smart, it is a national organization, but the local volunteer organization started by parents in Richland too. So that I worked with this group of volunteers when I was over in Richland too. We heard from a volunteer who signed up to speak at Citizens Participation. Believe that was October board meeting. Is that right? Yes. Okay. Yes, that was. So the October board meeting, and that volunteer asked the board to consider entering into a partnership with many other school districts in the Midlands areas, along with law enforcement and medical institutions, have entered into Be Smart. Be Smart is all about encouraging gun safety. It doesn't get into who should have a gun and who shouldn't. It is about keeping guns locked up in order to keep the guns out of the hands of our children. That is the one thing that it is about, who shouldn't have a gun, and that is out of the hands of our young children. And unfortunately, we did see yesterday another incident where there was a school shooting where a young child got their hands on a gun and went into a school. But also, this organization encourages us to remember that guns are also a major role in our children taking their own lives. And so keeping guns locked up is a twofold purpose, hopefully to prevent children from doing harm to themselves or to others. And so it is an acronym for keeping your guns secure, to model responsible behavior, asking about if you're sending your child to stay with someone, asking them, do they have guns in their house and do they keep them locked up, recognizing the role that unsecured guns plays in suicide, and then telling your peers to be smart. In terms of some stats, this is some national information, and every year nearly 360 children under the age of 18 gain access to a firearm and unintentionally shoot themselves or someone else. 4.6 million children in the U.S. Live in a household with at least one loaded unlocked gun. These statistics are based on data that went through 2023. Two studies that the national organization talks about show that the simple act of keeping guns locked up does make a difference in lowering incidents where children are harmed or can do harm to someone else. And then the volunteers were able to provide me with some local information. The first MOU was signed back in December of 2021, and with the partnering organizations, the law enforcement organizations and the medical institutions help provide funds to purchase gun locks. And from 2022 to 2023, the organization gave out 5,000 gun locks. And they have been able to secure some more during 2024, and they've given out almost 1,200. You can see, we certainly cannot make a direct correlation, but Columbia was ranked third in the nation for stolen guns in 2021, and they are currently ranked 28. Again, no one from the organization is saying that they are the reason this ranking has improved, but it certainly, I think, contributed to that ranking coming down or going up, however you want to look at that, which is an important statistic. So I hope that provided Ms. Shealy some statistics regarding the success of the campaign. Excuse me. Basically, what the MOU asks us to do is to provide awareness. We are kind of the education arm, and just going back to this very simple message through using this information here, putting this information about secure, model, ask, recognize, and tell in our handbooks, and periodically sharing it in Inside Voice and on social media. that would be kind of our standard of helping to spread the message. So I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. And I did, just so you know, the volunteers, I told them not to worry about coming tonight because I knew we were at the end of the agenda and we had a long meeting. So I thought the volunteer who came in October did a very thorough job of making the request on behalf of the organization, and that I could handle it tonight. So, but I'll be glad if you want to speak to any of the volunteers, certainly can make that connection for you.
Ms. Roof, thank you so much. Board members, do you have any follow-up questions for Ms. Roof about Be Smart?
So there's no binding contract between us and Be Smart. It's just we can utilize their tools and kind of put that in our schools or in the hands of parents or what have you to make them aware.
That is correct. That is correct. Using their, I'm sorry, I promise I did not sound like this at the beginning of today. This has progressed as the day has gone on. Using their materials, so it makes our communications job, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and being able to just put that in our, already using our communications channels.
I guess the only other question is, well, what justifies the reason for MOU? Is that to keep us from being accused of copywriting their material or distributing their material, or?
It really is. The MOU idea came about from having a discussion on trying to galvanize support around the Be Smart and how can we demonstrate support for this very important message. So it is ceremonial in many senses, and what we will plan hopefully in after the first of the year is an opportunity where for the signing, board members can come. We'll have Be Smart volunteers, some of our law enforcement officials who've already signed. We'll get everyone together so that we can, as we add our signature to the document, can make that big announcement. In reviewing the MOU again with the volunteers, we do have Lexington County, and the town of Lexington is already one law enforcement agency that I noticed was not included was the town of Pillion. So I connected them with Chief Reboll, and he, the volunteer that I spoke with has indicated that he is on board, and so we'll hopefully be able to get all three of our law enforcement agencies that we work with for our school resource officers and us together for a ceremonial signing.
Thank you so much. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes.
Ms. Roof, I know a lot of this is based on schools, but are there, say, hospitals and other organizations that are a part of this program as well?
Yes, yes. Initially, one of the big supporters, Prisma Health, joined on from the very beginning, and they were one of the ones who have supported and provided the gun locks. The hospitals and the law enforcement agencies have been the two organizations that are providing the gun locks that then through our connections or through the volunteers, we then try to get them into the hands of parents.
And the ask about the presence of unsecured guns, this isn't about us trying to get anybody in trouble. It's just a safety thing, correct?
Absolutely not, no. Not trying to get anyone in trouble. We are just really trying to make sure that people have access to the resources they need to secure their firearms.
Ms. Roof, I want to just add my appreciation and thanks for looking up and getting some additional statistics. I think it makes a lot of sense, but having the numbers to kind of back up, I think what we all already understand is an issue across our nation. And I think this is a really neat opportunity to kind of link arms with our local healthcare providers and law enforcement and city and town councils to say we understand this is important. We want to help educate folks regarding how to be safer. So thank you for bringing this to us.
Absolutely. And I will mention, I could probably scan through here, but I know the town of Lexington and the county sheriff's department have already signed the MOU. We are, and not every single school district in Lexington County, but a majority of them have.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we have a motion to approve the superintendent to sign the memorandum of understanding with the Be Smart organization, and a second. We've had discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Moving on to item 12.2, that's the second reading of the administrative rule KBER, support organizations. Do I hear a motion to approve administrative rule KBER, school support organizations, to incorporate new statutory requirements and replace administrative rule LECR?
Madam Chair, I move to approve Administrative Rule KBE-R, School Support Organizations, to incorporate new statutory requirements and replace Administrative Rule LEC-R.
Thank you, Ms. Shealy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Now for discussion, I'll turn it over to Ms. Roof again.
Thank you. The changes since first reading are highlighted for you in blue. There was a question regarding the audit that hold on a second, like Ms. Friedman, I might need to put some glasses on. The question about the district may require an audit, and since there was some confusion and we wanted to make sure we were completely in line with exactly what the statute said, we reworded that. In that section, it talks about that in accordance with the state law, a booster club may be required by the school board to submit an accounting compilation or review. It's not absolutely, like it may have to happen if there was an indication of something we needed to investigate. We cannot require the board, you all cannot require an external audit except when there is a finding of specific cause determined by a majority vote of the board members. So that was, it was very, like one sentence about the board may require an audit. And so we wanted to be more specific to reassure our booster clubs that we are not going to go around and request audits randomly and for no good reason. The other question revolved around the fundraising bullet points, and so we reordered them and then tried to kind of communicate the intent of the first three bullet points is just that the principal and the booster club or PTA support organizations, I shouldn't just say booster clubs, support organizations should be working together, and that parents need to receive advance notification of any type of fundraising involving students, and no one should directly solicit money from a student without that prior notification of a parent. So parents being notified that there's going to be, I think the question came up like pennies for patients, where there may be a table at the school where kids can drop off their change. And really the intent is where we did not want a member of any type of fundraising organization to just walk up to a student and say, hey, would you like to donate $5 to our organization? We didn't want anyone making those kind of direct requests. So I hope that we have clarified those points that were a little confusing there, and I'll be glad to answer any other questions.
So, Ms. Roof, if someone wants to sell Chick-fil-A biscuits in the car line, we need to notify the parents the day before. Is that
And that
correct?
usually, that is definitely something that is notified, because usually it's the parents in the car line, myself, who planned that breakfast, getting that, yes.
With approval from the principal.
Right, with
Right.
approval from the principal, right.
I have a couple questions, sorry.
Yes, sir.
So first question is, I know we're talking about support organizations. Does this policy deal with, say, a certain sport, like say baseball, they have their own fundraiser? It's not by a booster club, it's not by a PTO or anything else, but it's by the sport itself that's doing the fundraiser. How does this policy affect that at all?
If the fundraiser, this is strictly for support organizations. So if it's a fundraiser that is initiated by the team, by the coach, by the group of students, no, that would not apply, in my opinion, would not apply. This is very clear that this deals with support organizations. Ms. Miller, I look to you to make sure I'm correct on that.
I agree. That would fall under our pupil activity funds, and they have to be in compliance with our finance guidelines.
Okay. Second question is a lot of the funds raised by booster clubs after their initial sponsorships, and some are at work canteens at games, and I know the policy states they have to deposit that money within 24 hours. Friday nights, getting out of games at 11:30, 12 o'clock after cleaning up stadium, that's hard to deposit within 24 hours. Is that a business day, or do we have to work on certain access for that?
I would say that the policy, and now I'll defer to Ms. Miller, we may have a little two different kind of answers to this. I would say what we are telling you in the policy is best practice, and that if something were to happen with those funds because the best practice couldn't be upheld, the district can't be responsible or liable for helping to replace that money. And that really is in that policy to cover the district to come if somebody came back and said, we had all this, we got this money from the canteen, there was just no way for our person to, we understand that, but we need to lay out for you the best practices to try to, if at all possible, get that to be followed, because the district can't take on that liability. So that would be how I would explain it, because I do understand that these are parents and these are volunteers, and those types of arrangements may be very difficult to uphold. But we felt like it was important that it be in there so that we're, very clear that the district cannot be liable for trying to replace that money if something were to happen. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Miller, will you add any?
I agree with that. And just from the district side, we follow that policy by having arrangements with local banks to do a night drop where they don't actually record the deposit at the bank, but we can put the money in a secure location with the bank. The SROs can follow the person so that there's safety taken into consideration, and then on Monday the bookkeeper would pick those funds back up and do the actual deposit information and then take it back to the bank.
Gotcha. Last question, and I promise this last question on this. Sorry, I got a booster club background. A lot of the booster clubs have student memberships. Will that still be allowed in this policy, or will it be, hey, your parents can buy you a student membership?
I think as long as it is communicated in some way that to parents ahead of time that students can join. So in the initial explanation at the beginning of the school year that we offer, and even if it's out on the website, we offer these types of memberships, as long as that's communicated ahead of time and publicly, and it's very easy for a parent to know that, I think that would still be allowed. One of the things I will say that we, in reviewing this administrative rule, with this administrative rule, you'll see a lot of stuff marched through it, and that's because it took the new model policy, and we took our old policy, and we felt like the new model policy did have some things that would be very onerous on our volunteer organization. So we were trying to strike a good balance between, we know our volunteers put in a lot of time and a lot of energy on our behalf to raise money to support our organizations, and we don't want to make things too difficult. At the same time, we're trying to keep parameters in place to protect the organization itself and the school district. So we're trying to strike that balance. So I do think something like that is still very, very viable, as long as it's just very clear and publicized well that is an option.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ruth. Okay, so we have a motion on the table to approve Administrative Rule KBER and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. All right, moving on to item 13.0, which are items for board information. You've received the following monthly financial reports for your information: the monthly general fund financial report for November 24, the monthly general fund budget transfers report for November of 2024, the monthly capital projects report from November, and the monthly unauthorized procurements report from November, as well as the quarterly grants update. So, board members, do you have questions for Ms. Miller about these 5 reports?
Ms. Miller, I do have a question for you. And I just want to make sure I'm looking at this right.
Okay.
So looking at the current state of our general fund, it looks like revenues received, round numbers, about 96 million so far. And expenses incurred about 130 million. So we've received about 34 million less than we've had to pay out, which I'm just trying to draw a parallel here, which is part of why we need a healthy fund balance. If we were to maintain just 2 months worth of fund balance, that's about 60 million based on our current expenses or budget. Is that about right?
About 65 million.
Okay, so if we had 65 at the end of last year and we're down 34, that's a little bit of a risky place to be if we were just to maintain that. Is that part of the reason we try to keep a little healthier fund balance than just that 2 months?
I think you were reading my notes, but actually you're spot on with that. What I have here is that the fund balance at November 30th would be much lower than what it was at June 30th. So at June 30th, while the audit firm just told you it was about 33%, my calculations now at November 30th have it at about 20%. You have to also remember that every time we increase the budget about $10 million, you have to increase the required fund balance about $1.7 million. So each year, yes, we're seeing an increase in our fund balance, but there's also an increase in the requirement because of the increase in expenditures. So it's a delicate balance of trying to make sure you keep the amount in there. I should see an increase starting in December. We start collecting the tax revenues, but it is about 80 million right now is where the unassigned fund balance is as of November 30th. And as the audit firm had mentioned, I've been at a district where you do have to take out a loan, a tax anticipation note, and pay the interest, costing the district more money, paying interest expense, just so you can meet payroll each month when the fund balance is not there.
Can I ask a follow-up question to the fund balance? In the information that you just went through, can you speak to what is unassigned versus what is assigned within those numbers, or could you follow up with that information?
I can work with the superintendent on that if that's the information we want to start including, but we don't calculate that each month. As the audit firm had mentioned, we operate on a cash basis through the year, and the statements are on an accrual basis. So they really would not be aligned to what you're used to seeing in the financial statements, just because we do not have that type of reporting on a monthly basis.
Do we have a concept of how much of the current fund balance is currently assigned?
When I'm reporting the fund balance, that 80 million includes assigned and unassigned. So if last year at June 30th you had 75 million of unassigned, and our total was about 114 million, now we only have 80 million total. I think we had assigned 9.5 million with for capital improvements and purchases, and then we had 24 million assigned out of the budget. So we definitely have an unassigned much lower than what we had at June 30th.
And let me just clarify, I'm not asking to try to get in the weeds, but I do think when we have a presentation to Mr. Pizzuto's point earlier, where the public sees you have $114 million, I think it would be helpful to start to break that down, and that's certainly an item the board can discuss in the future, so that the public can see what that money is doing, where it is going, and how it's potentially being earmarked or used in the future. Those are just my thoughts, board.
I think we've done a report before where we've shown kind of what we have assigned and the proportion, and maybe to Ms. Flashnick's point, we could maybe share that in a future meeting just to give a snapshot and understanding. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah.
And also, if you look at page, I'm going to guess, I think it's 21. I'm off. It's page 19. You can see the categories of fund balance at the bottom of that page. And the first column is the general fund, so you can see the breakout there of the difference between assigned and unassigned of that $114 million as of June 30th.
Board members, any other questions for Ms. Miller?
Ms. Miller, in the last few years, has the district ever been in a case where we didn't have enough in the fund balance to cover our bills?
No.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to item 13.6. So 6 of us board members attended the South Carolina School Boards Association Legislative Advocacy Conference and Delegate Assembly on December 7th and 8th in Charleston. So board members, any of you that were in attendance, do you want to share anything you took away? Anything you learned or found interesting at the conference?
I will just say that it was great to be there. There wasn't a whole lot of legislative talk, I guess, as much as maybe years past because it's a transition year. But we did get to hear from Ellen Weaver, and she gave a really great presentation and actually pointed out several districts across the state that had gone into the 75% category of, progress and making great strides. And Lexington 1 was in several of those categories, so we were able to stand and be recognized. So I was very proud of our district.
Definitely. Anyone else?
Go ahead.
We're reading body language up here. It was interesting to hear kind of not only what our legislators were thinking, but professional organizations within the education realm, kind of what they're focused on. In some ways, it's helpful to understand that the challenges we face as a district are not unique to us, from absenteeism to budgets to challenges with cell phones. I mean, across the state, folks are dealing with the same. So it's a good opportunity to talk to others and how they are dealing with some of those things and what we need to advocate on together. I was glad to hear that there's plans for discussion and hopefully advocacy regarding the funding formula ongoing. And that also the superintendent Weaver mentioned that she definitely wanted feedback regarding the cell phone policy before that becomes any kind of permanent law, and I think we're gearing up to be prepared to provide feedback as well. So some good things coming out of it. Just for a little giggle, somebody made a comment that if it's important, put an acronym on it. I think we can relate to that.
I'll just piggyback off of Ms. Shealy's comment about the cell phone and then Ms. McCown's comment about Superintendent Weaver. She did express the goal of the whole cell phone thing as free to focus, and that was kind of the slogan right now. So just a reminder, free to focus in January when we come back to school. No phones and devices. And with, Mr.
Yeah, I did have
I'm
one,
so
I did have
sorry.
one
Go
thing. You're
ahead.
fine. I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but one of the things that really stuck out for me was in one of the presentations they were talking about that 50% of the children before kindergarten are not prepared, which is a horrible statistic. So I want to charge us, the district, to make sure our 3K and 4Ks where they are, ready to start kindergarten, ready to start elementary school, because that is a sad statistic that we need to improve.
That is a sad statistic.
And I hate to end on that note, but you jumped in front of me when I was trying to talk, so you would have been last.
Sorry.
Well, Mr. Pizzuti, I'll jump behind you.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Rice.
So it was a legislative advocacy conference, and I guess one of the main things I drew from that is that, especially even hearing from some of the people in the State House that came, they don't hear very much from people back at home. They don't hear very much from elected school board members. And in most cases, if they don't hear about something going on back in their district that they represent, then obviously it's not happening there. And so what was interesting is they said, if you're going to engage with your, your representative or your senator, you're competing with 20 to 25 different issues of people that are competing with their attention. So what they said is, when you talk to them, keep it short, keep it direct, and also try to have a solution for them. Short, direct, and have a solution. They get a lot of, I can almost empathize with them. They get a lot of chatter and a lot of people complain, but they don't think long enough through their complaint with a solution to help the person. And so it challenged me in the way I need to advocate with our State House members when it comes to education. I thought, okay, if I'm going to talk with my representative, what can I do that's short, direct, and tell him what I need and give him a solution? And so, that was, for me, that was probably the number one thing. I'm like, okay, that's my marching orders for this year as far as advocating to my legislator.
And complaining without a solution is what? Whining.
With that, on behalf of the board, I'd like to wish all of our Lexington One family and community a happy, healthy, and safe holiday season. Enjoy your winter break, and we will see employees return to work on January 6th, and students will return to start second semester on January 7th. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Madam Chair, I'd like to take a point of privilege before you tonight. We have the first meeting of a newly elected board. We have newly elected officers. I'd like to say that the chief strength of all well-regulated institutions is harmony, and I will charge each of us with maintaining that harmony that we've enjoyed over the last couple of years. And with that, I will move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.